mic on, so you just press, oops. That's it.
Oh. Oh, yeah.
Right. Good morning, everybody. If I could call this meeting to order, because it is now 10 o'clock. Thank you very much for joining us here today, and welcome to members of the public and press who've joined us as well virtually. This is the second meeting of the County Council's Environment and Green Investment Committee, but the first in this building. The County Council allows filming and photography at its public meetings, so please feel free to take pictures and tweet during the meeting. Can I ask that everyone present turns their mobile phones to silent or vibrate while the meeting is taking place? Please be aware that the meeting is being live streamed and that a recording of the meeting will be available to view on the County Council's website. A couple of housekeeping points, as we are all new to this building. Toilets are available in the corridor adjacent to this room, and I will briefly adjourn the meeting after 2 hours for a comfort break. There is no fire alarm test scheduled for today. We are not planning to have a fire, so if the alarm sounds, I will adjourn the meeting and we will make our way downstairs and out of the main entrance. The muster point is on the green opposite the main entrance. I propose to waive the committee procedure rule limiting members' contributions to the debate. However, we have a lot of business to get through today, so I would ask all members to keep their contributions concise. So moving on, therefore, to the first item, which is apologies for absence and declarations of interest. Would the Democratic Services Officer please report any apologies for absence?
We have apologies from Councillor Gay. We have Councillor Howard substituting.
Thank you very much indeed. And does any member wish to declare any disclosable pecuniary interest or non-statutory disclosable interest? Councillor Goldsack and... Yeah.
Getting used to this. Chair, I've just been notified that Councillor Tierney is completely lost and hopes to be with us very soon.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Gardner.
Yes, I would like to declare an interest on item 7, which is the Anglian water, as I'm a member of the Planning Committee, in case that item comes to the Planning Committee in a future date.
Thank you very much indeed. And Councillor Bradnam.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to just declare a non-pecuniary interest in the item 7, as it is an application in my division. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Okay, so on to... Oh, no. Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Item 7 again. I'm on the Planning Committee too. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else on the Planning Committee? Councillor...
Thank you. I'm
Smith.
also on the Planning Committee.
Thank you. And
I'm the substitute.
right, okay. This is whittling this down rapidly. Councillor Hathorn. Yeah, and Councillor Ray. Yeah. Thank you very much indeed, everybody. And welcome, Councillor Tierney. Glad you found us in the end. Okay, on to item 2 then, and minutes of the previous meeting held on the 1st of July. So we're being asked to approve the minutes of the meeting as an accurate record. If any committee member wants to raise a question on the accuracy of the minutes only, can they please do so now? We're all content with the accuracy of the minutes. Thank you very much indeed. Then on that basis, the recommendation to approve the minutes is carried, and we have an updated action log also included in the published papers for this meeting. Are there any questions on the action log, or are we again happy to take that as noted? No? Okay, thank you very much indeed. We'll take that as noted. Item 3 is petitions and public questions. We have not received any petitions or public questions. So item 4 then is Northstowe Phase 3 and Phase 3B, Section 106 Agreements, Draft Heads of Terms. So can I please ask Colin Fitzsimons, Development and Policy Manager, to present this report, please?
So Colin is actually going to be joining us via hybrid, so I'll be waiting for Dem Services to actually admit him. He is not able to see the meeting at the moment. He's just messaged me.
Right. If we're having connection troubles, I'll give it a minute or so, and then if that is not resolved by then we will need to, I think, move on to item 5 and come back to item 4, but we'll give it a minute and see whether we can connect.
It would appear he's actually in the meeting, because we have his name up on the screen, just we don't have his camera on.
I'm relying on those with the technology to let me know whether that's
I'm just explaining that he's definitely online, but he can't see any of the meeting at the moment. So I've just asked if he's in the waiting room or what's happening.
We will wait briefly to see whether we can resolve the connection issues, and if we can't do that quickly, then I will suggest that we then move on to item 5 and come back to item 4 once the technology has...
Just to confirm, Colin can't hear, and I've also had a message from Adam to say he can't hear either. So everyone that's connected on that screen at the moment cannot hear. So we may want to jump to that next item and come back. Chair, if that's okay.
In that case, members, are you content for us to move to item 5 to keep business moving on, which is North East Cambridge Area Transport Approach?
Hello, can everyone hear me?
Oh, goodness me.
I'm not getting any sound back from the committee and I can't see anything, so I will present my introduction to the piece anyway.
Is that Colin?
Hello, yes.
It's Adam here. I've got the same thing. I've just sent a Teams message to Emma just to say that we're sitting in a waiting room and can't hear or see anything at the moment.
Right, I'm not sure whether I'm in the committee, yes or not.
If you can tell
no, I don't think I am either.
A technical issue, so jumping to David first.
Okay.
Hi, it's Tam here. I can't hear anything in the committee either.
Okay, right, Emma says stop talking because we're talking over the meeting.
Can
Okay,
we
so go
mute
mute.
them?
It's hybrid with a twist.
Can I suggest we turn that off before they say something they might regret?
Okay, can we advise them that we're moving on to item 5 and sorting out the technology, and we hope to come back to item 4 once that has been done. If it can't be done, then we'll have to cross that bridge when we come to it. So, North East Cambridge Area Transport Approach, and we do have David Allott physically present in the room, which resolves a lot of difficulties. So, I'm going to ask David to present this report. Thank you, David.
Mic on. Hi members, David Allott, Assistant Director for Transport Strategy and Network Management at the county, and I'm going to present the paper on the North East Cambridge area and the transport approach. This is an area with great level of growth potential, both on the Science Park and on the wastewater treatment works site. Large number of jobs and houses targeted to be brought forward. And the local planning authority is advancing an area action plan for this area. What the area action plan would do is really set out the key principles, quantums of development, and provide a framework for future planning applications so that a strategic view can be taken of the whole area rather than piecemeal bit by bit developments. The County Council did a piece of transport evidence work to look at the transport capacity available and understand how that growth ambition could be catered for in transport terms. And what became very clear is that the existing highway network is at capacity, and it wouldn't be appropriate just to keep creating new highway capacity and perpetuate the problem that we've seen in many areas, that being that new roads get built and new cars appear and we continue to pump out carbon, and the behavioural shift that we want to achieve doesn't happen. So we've taken, in partnership with the local planning authority, we've taken a different view here, and we've explored what's possible in terms of how could you drive forward a behavioural shift that doesn't lead to additional cars on the network. Can we bring forward a transport infrastructure package and a set of design principles and standards and a trip budget that essentially ensures that new development doesn't put additional trips on the network? What this paper does is it sets out what that package would look like. It also sets out the principle that the developers that would come forward in due course would need to support the finances to deliver that package. Some of these schemes are established schemes being worked through by partners such as the Greater Cambridge Partnership. Others are schemes that we would need the developers to bring forward and fund separately and directly. It sets out the principle of the trip budget and the fact that developers would need to accord with that trip budget. And it also sets out that the developments would have to take in restrictive approaches to car parking within their site, and that the developers would need to bring forward a cohesive multi-developer transport strategy so that they can play back to us the fact that they are bought in to these principles, and that if they are going to bring forward large master plans, that those master plans from the developer perspective are bought into and brought forward in accordance with this essential behavioural shift. Now, in planning terms, we can't necessarily stop applications jumping the gun and coming in before this strategic work has concluded. But what we can do is set our stall out as a county council. So what's included in the report is the approach that we are taking, and that is a position statement that sets out the key principles. I think in essence the position is saying that we can't be supportive, or that we don't believe the technical case against the national planning policy will stack up for a developer that comes in prior to this strategic piece that doesn't demonstrate a zero net increase in car trips and doesn't facilitate the agenda. So that's essentially what the position sets out, and that position's set out there in Appendix B. We're really seeking endorsement of that position and approach to make sure that the responses that we may have to put in to the planning process are in that vein and are supportive of that overall message, to make sure that this site can develop, but that it develops in a way that is sustainable in terms of providing opportunities for active travel modes, minimising car use, and that principles then follow through right through into the very design of the site.
Thank you very much indeed, David. The recommendation on this paper is that the committee approves the approach to the assessment and consideration of traffic and transport impacts and the associated transport position as set out within the paper at 2.4. I'm going to formally move that from the chair to open up the debate and ask whether Councillor Howard will second. Thank you very much. Before we move into the debate on that, however, I have been notified of an amendment that is to be put by Councillor Hathorn. So I'd like to move to Councillor Hathorn to ask her to move her amendment.
So the amendment that I would like to add is an addition to the transport position statement, which is: applications in the area must provide generous, secure and easy to use storage for cycles, e-bikes, cargo bikes, trailers and other active travel modes. There should be capacity for community storage of shared cycling facilities such as trailers and e-cargo bikes, and the infrastructure to support significant levels of commercial deliveries by cargo bike. Shall I explain why I would like that amendment?
Could I just ask whether that is seconded? Thank you, Councillor Ferguson. Very well, if you'd like to then proceed, Councillor Hathorn.
So when I read the document, there was a big bit about cars and how we restrict cars, and there was a big bit about routes, and then I turned over expecting to see a bit about how we design this area for the future in terms of the facility you need for cycling, and it just wasn't there, and it rang alarm bells. Because if you get rid of all the car parking space, not only do you make it difficult for cars, but you also don't have that space for cycle storage. I've been on 6 cycle holidays and we have a lot of kit. We need at least the size of a car parking space for our family cycling kit. So I was really concerned that if that detail isn't there, the developers will have a tendency to squeeze the amount of space until there isn't sufficient space for the needs that people will need to live within this community with the cycling facilities they need. Because once you've got rid of your car, you're going to need more cycling kit than you have with a car. That was how I got there. And also, in terms of deliveries, commercial deliveries, there's likely to be a big transition to cargo bikes. And cargo bikes are different from a van. A van you can lock up on the street with all the goods in. A cargo bike is less secure. So it's just about making sure that all these details are in place so they don't get squeezed later on, and so that the proposals come in are good enough and they're not squeezed later on, and really thinking through the detail of cycling and making sure it's in there as a necessary and essential principle right from the start.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hathorn. Before I open up the amendment to debate, I'd like to ask whether anybody has any questions of the officer, of David Allat, purely about the amendment. Councillor Ferguson.
Are there any other examples of these kind of car-free communities? Because reading through it for the first time, it was difficult for me to imagine. I mean, the only place where it could possibly work in the UK was perhaps Cambridge. But are there any other examples that you know of?
Yes, when we undertook the transport evidence base, we wanted to make sure that the assumptions applied to this area were credible and realistic, and looking at what had been achieved elsewhere. Yeah, I think the best example is a Cambridge example, CB1 area. Also, the biomedical campus achieves a high sustainable mode share. The area does benefit from and will benefit from those levels of connectivity if we get the infrastructure right. So it was felt that the ambition was credible in setting out the mode shifts that we would need to achieve and how we can make this work. The devil will of course be in the detail, and we'll dive into that through individual assessments for applications as they come forward.
Thank you very much. I've got Councillor Bradnam with a question and then Councillor Smith with a question.
Sorry, mine was for the debate.
Sorry, that wasn't a question. Councillor Smith, is yours a question for David Allat?
Thank you. Mine's just a quickie, and I heard every word of that. Thank you very much. I'm struggling to hear some things, I must admit. Can I ask, basically, you're mentioning cycling. Is this just cycling or for all non-motorised users to be included? I think Councillor Mills knows exactly where I'm coming from, but is it for all non-motorised users to be thought about?
Right, I'll ask David Allat to respond to that.
Oh, sorry.
It's questions for the officer at this point.
Yes, it is, and in the suggested amendment we've added "and other active travel modes." The reality is, when our officers receive the applications, this is exactly what we're looking for anyway. So from my perspective, it would only help the position statement to, rather than hinder it, just to set that out, because it is in fact our ambition and what we want to achieve.
Thank you. Councillor Gardiner, you've got a question.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, one quick question really. I can understand people having bikes and cargo bikes for travelling in and out of Cambridge, but what are we going to do with regard to people having they will still need a car if they're travelling further afield? So we need to make sure that we've got places for people to park those cars and their bikes at the same time, because I think that's essential. You know, if they're going to be travelling down wherever they want to travel to go on holiday, they're going to need a car.
Yeah, absolutely, and the approach to this area doesn't suggest that there is no role for the car to play in future travel. It's the car is of course the most convenient mode, or the most suitable mode for a number of journeys, particularly longer distance journeys. The reason that we've got the congestion problems that we have at the moment is that the car is often used in lieu of using other modes that could easily cater for that journey. And if we're able to create a scenario where we can take the vast majority of car users out of the equation because they are travelling for those shorter journeys without the need of the car, it reduces the need for the number of cars on site and the car parking spaces. So again, for various reasons, accessibility reasons, journey length reasons, we're not suggesting that the car has no role to play in this, and we need to cater for that role in a credible and sensible way. But we do see a huge opportunity here to ensure that walking, cycling, other accessible modes, public transport and rail become much more of a default option for the majority of journeys that people make. And also, just to add to that, the nature of the development mix as well, by mixing residences and employment site within the same site, you reduce that need to travel further yet as well.
Thank you. Councillor Milnes next, please, and then Councillor Goldsack.
Thank you, Joe. Actually, I'm disappointed to hear you say that, because one of the things that I hoped that we might do with this development is have effectively not a low car, but a no car zone. And I think the aspirations, certainly as far as I'm aware, for both South Cambs and the city, is that effectively when this is marketed, the expectation is that you won't need a car to successfully live in this area. We see examples in London. The amount of car ownership is very low because public transport and private hire vehicles, Ubers and taxis, we see that they've increased usage immensely over the last 10-15 years since the introduction of the congestion zone. But it requires a
Councillor
different...
Milnes, is this a question for the officer, because it's going on a bit?
Well, what I'm asking is how we can manage that expectation, if at all, through this policy, and make sure that the expectations from developers and people who are buying properties there actually have the expectations set correctly in this regard. So where are the zip cars, pool cars, and so on?
Absolutely, and I think touching on the shared cars and different ownership models, I think is a fantastic way forward in reducing the number of cars that you need in your site, and also saving costs and creating more developable space. Where does that sit? That sits in the AAP that is being worked up through the local planning authority and parking authority with our support. I suppose what we are saying at this point through our position statement is that we wouldn't support any premature applications that result in additional car trips, because I think against the NPPF, National Planning Policy Framework, that's as far as we could go at this stage.
Thank you, and I would like to remind people that we are still on questions to the officer at this point, not the debate. So, Councillor Goldsack, please.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for the presentation. 1.1, you say the Greater Cambridge Shared Planning Team, which is made up of South Cambridgeshire District Council and Cambridge City Council. Have you spoken to Fenland and East? And have they had any involvement in any discussions in this?
This is a piece of, the AAP is a piece of work that's been led by the local authorities within their geography, but as part of the development of this piece of work, they will have to consult wider. I'm not leading that AAP piece of work personally, so I don't know to what extent early priming has been done with East Cambs and Fenland, but I would expect that it has. I could perhaps follow up with the lead officer on that and pop an email about what activities have taken place so far about early communication about this piece of work.
So my follow-up question then, in line with your recommendation, we're being asked, I couldn't see any reference in the paperwork to any discussions with any other neighbour. I think it's fair to say that quite a change here will have a wider effect and a ripple effect to people that come in and move in and out of the area and into the area. To have not seen any correspondence with local authorities leaves me, unfortunately, in a position where, if I look at the recommendation, not sure it's there. You're saying you can go away and find, you're asking us to vote on it today, so I'm feeling very uncomfortable with it, I'm afraid.
Point noted. I have to say I'm aware that the Greater Cambridge Planning Team is very ambitious. I hadn't realised its ambitions extended to incorporate Fenland and East Cambridgeshire. And I think the point can also be made, surely, Councillor Goldsack, that any traffic and transport proposal anywhere impacts on anybody else. I don't think Fenland consulted Cambridge on its proposals to go to civil parking enforcement, for example, but there we go.
Chair, if I can, through the officer, because that's where the questions were, we've got a massive development at Land Beach, which will have an impact on this area and people coming in and through this area. You're another mile or two further on, and you're into East Cam, so it's going to have the same effect. That's the real point, and maybe the Fenland one's a bit further out, but I think there's room there. There should have been some discussion.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Goldsack. Councillor Ferguson.
Can I ask a question about enforcement? So this will probably work well for the first generation of residents, but as you get to subsequent generations, maybe some of the ambition will slip. So 2.16 talks about physically controlling site trips using signalling and highway works. How would that work in practice, do you think?
This is certainly a level of detail that needs to be worked up about how we hold developers to a trip budget. In other areas, we've also used the trip budget to actually restrict the level of future phases that can come forward if a site's underperforming. Waterbeach is a good example of that. But when we are talking about physical restrictions and signalling, it's about there is an opportunity here to explore manipulating the signal timings at the exits of the site such that driving becomes less attractive because people will have, you know, the advantage of driving would be lost because there is effectively a red signal there. But I wouldn't want to overstep and provide specific detail of that now because we really do need to explore how the trip budget will work in practice. But there are a range of different ways of doing it.
Thank you. Councillor Bradnam, question for the officer.
Thank you, Chair. I have an item for the debate, but I just wanted to ask Mr. Allott, through you, Chair, can we be reassured that there will be sufficient enforcement to protect the surrounding residential areas, my own village of Milton Village, for example, from displacement parking? Because if there is minimal parking on the site, it's we already have evidence that people park in Milton in order to go, for example, currently to the Cambridge Science Park, because it's a lot easier to park in Milton than to get onto the Science Park. So we really need to be sure that there will be sufficient parking protection for residents in Milton. And indeed, I believe there are areas, Moss Bank and the areas in the surrounding areas of Cambridge City, which would want the same protection. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we'd be deluded if we thought we'd solve the parking problem by just displacing parking elsewhere around the community. And it's important that as part of the detail of this, we use the powers that we have and we use mitigations through development to make sure that they prevent that from happening and that the technical work done both pre-application and post-application in terms of monitoring make sure that we can identify the risk of that and means to step in and prevent that from happening. Obviously, with civil parking enforcement powers being pursued, that's another potential weapon in our arsenal in helping to prevent that from happening.
Thank you. And Councillor Bradnam, you want a supplementary question?
Thank you very
please.
much, Chair. Just to be clear, we know that unless there is civil parking, the police are very unlikely to enforce this. So we really need to have a clear idea of actually what action would be taken. And the other point that one of the other councillors made, have we any consideration of remote, secure parking for cars belonging to people who live on this new development? The proposal is to produce car parking barns on site, but I'm just wondering whether we need to think ahead of that and produce good quality secure parking off-site to protect this, to prevent this displacement parking. Thank you.
Yes, I think both within the recommendations of the study and also wider pieces of work recognise that there are significant benefits to be explored here from further park and rides on the corridor, and that's effectively what we're looking at here. I think it's a great idea, and it's part of the recommendation for us to explore that opportunity in terms of consolidating car parking further out and away from the site and local areas.
Thank you. And final question from Councillor Goldsack.
Thank you. Just a very quick one, Mr. Allott. Does this paper have to go before Highways Committee?
No, it doesn't. Thus far, it's been to the Greater Cambridge Joint Planning Committee. Really, that is to inform them that the County Council may be required to submit planning application responses on applications in their geography. And what this paper really does in its essence, as well as provide the context as to the why our position is what it is, essentially we wanted to advise the planning committee that this is the nature of the county council responses. We are not going to be supportive of development proposals that don't meet this criteria, because we don't think those proposals could stack up against the not only against the future vision and the work that's going on through the emerging AAP, but also against the current national planning policy framework.
Thank you. Right, okay, we've had a lot of questions, therefore, which I hope means that we will have a much shorter debate as a result of being much better informed. So can I ask, we're still debating the amendment, so can I ask for any contributions on the amendment that anybody feels need to be made before we move to a vote on that? Councillor Bradnam.
Thank you, Chair. I'd absolutely endorse the amendment proposed by Councillor Haythorne. The proposal to add requirements for infrastructure to enable and encourage the use of cycles must be plentiful and accessible. Plentiful and accessible cycle parking. And make no mistake, this needs to be a quantum leap different to what we currently have in our local plans, because this is an exemplar new development which is relying on no additional use of no additional cars on the A10 or Milton Road, and in order to achieve that, it needs a really fundamental change in thinking to how people live on that development and work in it, and it will rely on the use of cycles and active modes of transport to succeed. And for example, one of our members asked, do we have an exemplar of this working before? I'm afraid what we have is an example of where it hasn't worked, this sort of thing hasn't worked very well. Our experience at Orchard Park on the north edge of Cambridge has been that minimising car parking, whilst welcomed in principle, can have unexpected consequences. And the unfortunate outcome of that development has been that people have disregarded the requirement to reduce the number of cars, and there is indiscriminate parking on pavements and around the development, which has been very detrimental to the safety and environment of Orchard Park. And that's not what we want to happen at North East Cambridge. So I would absolutely endorse Councillor Haythorne's request for this amendment.
Thank you very much. Any other indications to speak? I'm not seeing any at this stage, so can I ask to see all those in favour of the amendment from Councillor Hathorn, please? Thank you very much. Can I see those against? One. Can I see any... two. Can I see any abstentions, please? 2 abstentions as well. Okay, thank you very much indeed. That is significantly carried, so thank you very much indeed, Councillor Hathorn. With that amendment, I'm now throwing open the debate on the recommendation as amended. Do I have any speakers? Councillor Milnes.
I'd just quickly like to follow on from my own comments earlier, and I think the aspiration for this development should be at a no-car level in order to expectation manage the people that are coming to live here. I think it can be achieved that non-motorised use can be reduced to a minimum. There will be exceptions for sure, but we need a change in attitude, a change in perception of whether people can live without their umbilical cord tied to their personal motor vehicles. There are plenty of opportunities for car sharing, pooling, zip car hire type schemes that will allow people to use their cars when they need it. Most cars sit on drives or sit in the car park at work. The average car trip is something like 6.5 miles per day. So we're completely wasting our resources by all having cars. Even Barry Ashurst last night at Great Shelford Parish Council said we have to accept that we have to get out of our cars to either walk, cycle or get on public transport. That's the mentality that we need to adopt, and I think this policy document endorses that very substantially, and so thank you for the work that we've done.
Thank you. I don't think I see any other speakers. Councillor Tierney.
Thank you, Chair. So obviously I take a different view to Councillor Milnes, but I would quite like to see his zero car development take place, simply because I'd like to see it catastrophically fail so that it would never be tried again, because it's so crazy. I cannot possibly say how deluded I believe this direction of travel is. People are not going to give up their cars, because your car is your freedom. People owning their own car is their freedom. You might as well say people should stop being umbilically tied to their washing machine. People should stop being umbilically tied to their lighting in their house. This is part of modern life that people love and appreciate. And the freedom that it grants people of all different wealth brackets and all different types is immense. And to try and authoritarian them down to you must use this thing that we give you with limited routes is crazy. I won't be supporting this at all. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Tierney. It's always good to have you present here in these meetings to remind us about which is the party of the environment. Councillor Goldsack.
I'm sorry, I take exception to your last comment, Chair. That's unfair. That's completely unfair, okay? The point I wanted to raise is I'm thinking about the residents of this place when it's built that might need a carer that has got to come all the way there from public transport, can't get there, can't get in, might be bringing shopping and won't be able to drive to the front door to drop off this shopping to the person. I also go back, because unfortunately my hometown was blighted by this, I also go back to the last Labour government when the Deputy Prime Minister declared, well, the best way to get rid of cars is not to allow anywhere to park them. And we have housing development after housing development with no driveways and no parking areas. And guess what? Fire engines, refuse trucks can't get in them because that's where people park their cars. What about electric cars? Are we now saying that they're not environmentally friendly? Have we not got a provision for electric cars? You know, and actually, I just had a vision in my head of some poor, maybe disabled, maybe elderly person parking in a barn and then walking 150, 200 yards with armfuls of shopping to get back to where they're living. Maybe I'll be proved in 10 years' time that I won't say we, that I am out of date. But I wish you well with it, but I just can't see it myself. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hathorn.
I think it's a good question about carers and blue badges, and I had the same concerns. And I have been doing some detective work on this, and I was reassured actually that there is provision that if you need a blue badge, you'll be able to get a parking space near where you live. Also, you know, it's very thoughtful and it's very well thought out. Or parts of it do deal with those more complex issues, but this isn't. But that's a different piece of work. From my understanding, this is the position statement, which needs to be strong and bold to establish a position, and then the detail is nuanced at a later point.
Thank you, Councillor King.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. As a Conservative Environment Network councillor, I do take offence to your previous comments. I do think they're very unfair, so I'd just like to note that, please. But I do think it's important that, just to reiterate Councillor Goldsack's comments, that we do future-proof these kind of developments for movement towards electric vehicles, but also to make sure that those who really do need their cars for disabilities and such like are protected. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I do think your problem is with Councillor Tierney rather than with me, but we'll let that pass.
Chair, that's not what you said. That's not absolutely what you said. You said you reminded us to which party. You didn't mention it as an individual. That's why I took offence.
I very specifically mentioned Councillor Tierney.
No, you did not.
I did.
We will listen back to it. Thank you.
Also, Chairman, although I don't mind a bit of humour, I certainly don't mind you popping a bit of fun at me, but nonetheless, I am entitled to my view and I shouldn't be being shot down by the chairman for holding a different view to everyone else. I might hold a different view to my colleagues and definitely to the people opposite, but I am entitled to that view and to express it.
Absolutely you are, and other people are entitled to take their different view as well. I don't see any other speakers, I think, so I will now draw this to a close. The point of this proposal here in front of us today is to be bold and ambitious in envisaging a different future for an area of Cambridge that does not rely exclusively on the private motor car. And I think that this has been strengthened by the amendment which many of us voted for earlier, which actually went that step further to say, if we are going to be moving into this new world, if we are going to envisage a world in which it's possible to get about and live one's life without a motor car, what would that look like, and what alternative provision would we need to make in order to make that possible? I think that was a helpful amendment, so I'm very grateful for it. I'm very pleased indeed with the work that has gone into developing this set of principles against which we can judge applications as they come forward, and I look forward very much to seeing that implemented in practice. And to see a very new type of development, or set of developments, which can be a real trailblazer in this county for how to do things very differently for the future, a future in which we must learn to live more sustainably. So I'm absolutely delighted to see this paper. I'd like to thank David Allott for the work that he has put into it, along with other colleagues. Thank Councillor Hathorn for the amendment, and I'm now going to put the amended recommendation to the vote. Can I see those in favour, please? Can I see those against? And any abstentions? Sorry, a senior moment there. Abstentions, 2 abstentions. Thank you very much indeed. That is very significantly carried. So thank you very much indeed, David. I'm going to ask officers now whether we have resolved the technical difficulties that beset us earlier and whether we are therefore able to return to item 4.
Chair, we'd like to have a go. We think we've resolved the issue. If not, I think Emma's got a statement from the report author that she can read out.
Thank you. I'm all in favour of having a go, so let's have a go and see whether we can return to item 4.
Okay, if I can just clarify, what's happening is they're watching on one device on YouTube and they'll be presenting on another. So what you'll have to just bear in mind is there might be a slight delay. So I'm doing it via Teams with them as well. So what I'll do is I'll say to Colin that he'll be able to put his camera on, and then he'll be able to speak to us. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. And item 4, in case we have forgotten, is the Section 106 agreements, draft heads of terms for Northstowe Phase 3A and Phase 3B. And with any luck, we will have Colin Fitzsimons talking to us.
Hello, yes, thank you, and good morning. Again, apologise for the inconvenience we experienced earlier. Can you all hear me now? Hello, yes, thank you.
We can.
Good morning. Again, apologise for the inconvenience we experienced earlier. Can you all hear me now?
Oh, that is a delay.
Right. Because I'm working off 2 devices, I'm getting a lot of delay and feedback, so I'm going to turn the volume down there. Okay, let me begin. Right, so this is an application made by Homes England, 2 applications for Phase 3A of Northstowe, which will comprise...
Sorry, I've been asked by Councillor Bradnam whether she can intervene. Councillor Bradnam.
I think Mr.
Here's another problem.
He needs to turn off, he needs to mute
I think
one of his devices.
That's what he has just done. So, Colin, if you could resume, please. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yep. So yes, as I say, this is 2 applications made by Homes England for Phase 3A and Phase 3B of Northstowe. Phase 3A is for 4,000 dwellings, and Phase 3B is for 1,000 dwellings. These applications are in addition to the 1,500 homes granted to. Sorry, I'm still getting messages. This is not working out well. I'm getting an awful lot of feedback and delay.
Sorry about that,
Okay,
Colm.
let me try again.
I'm wondering whether. Right. Okay. If you can just,
Yep.
are you
Okay.
able to just
I'm
go
getting
for it
messages.
and
Thank
then
you.
stop?
I know what's happening now.
Are you
Okay,
just
so
able to
sorry,
just
I'll
go
start
for it
again.
and then
This is in
stop,
addition
and
to
then
the
we'll be able to.
1,500 homes granted outline planning permission in April 2014 for phase 1, which we all know as the Gallagher site, and 3,500 homes for phase 2 in January 2017, which is also made by Homes England. Cumulatively, this will bring the total number of homes across all phases of North Stowe to the 10,000 dwellings which we were expecting. In September 2020, the Environment and Sustainability Committee was asked to approve the Council's technical response to the Phase 3A and Phase 3B outline planning applications. Since that committee, officers have now been working with the applicant and South Cambridgeshire to resolve those issues raised by the County Council and to work towards agreeing heads of terms for the Section 106 agreement. This report before the committee today sets out those draft heads of terms proposed for both planning applications, including what infrastructure has been agreed, the costs and triggers for payment of the contributions, and the delivery of any works in kind which might be required. The recommendation is that the committee approves the heads of terms as set out in the report and grant delegated authority to complete the Section 106 agreement following a resolution yet to be made by South Cambridgeshire's Planning Committee. We think the committee will be in October or November this year. Tables 1 and 2 in the report summarise the education and community infrastructure mitigations that will be secured through the 106, and the proposed package of transport mitigations are set out in Appendix A to the report. Thank you. Has anyone any questions?
Thank you very much indeed, Colm. In view of the delays and the technical difficulties, I think it would be pretty much impossible for people to ask questions orally and for you to provide an oral response. So what I'm going to ask is for David Allat. David's going to, you're in a position to respond to any questions on this, are you, David? On Colm's behalf.
Yes, I can certainly try, but I won't overstep. If something comes up that we're not able to answer, we absolutely can provide written answers afterwards, but certainly I've been involved in the transport negotiations, so well placed for specifically transport questions.
Thank you. On that basis then.
Yeah, and
Emma.
I'll obviously come in and I'll be able to type with, Colm will be able to type anything to me as well. Colm, can you put yourself on mute when you hear me in a minute? I'll message you.
Thank you. So we've got a two-pronged approach, therefore, that if there are questions that David can answer directly here today, then that's fine. Sure. Otherwise, we will have a chat relay question session with Colm online via Emma. Thank you, Emma, and hope to manage that way. So does anybody have any questions by whatever mechanism for either Colm or David? Councillor Smith.
Thank you. Basically, I've had a look through it, obviously. It says the electoral divisions affected. It doesn't mention sort of mine. I'm in Papworth and Swavesey, and North Stowe does affect Swavesey with the drainage issues. So I'd like to see that. Is that taken care of in this section 106? The fact that any drainage issues are sorted out, or impacts of North Stowe on surrounding villages, and also, without sounding like a scratched record, it mentions cycling infrastructure, but it doesn't mention all non-motorised users. That were my points. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there a response to that from David? Are you able to enlighten us?
Firstly, sorry. In terms of the cycling infrastructure, much of this applies to all non-motorised users. It's a matter of terminology, and the detail of the cycle schemes will be worked up through.
Yeah, it's just sort of in my sort of simple mind, it doesn't mention it all the time. It just mentions one, you know.
Yeah.
Not that I've got anything against cycling. I cycle myself. Don't think that.
It's a good point, and particularly cycle modes are changing, evolving with new cycle modes, electric cycles, scooters and the like. And yes, it is a matter of terminology there that we will be catering for those modes through the design of the cycling mitigation secured.
So it's all non-motorised users are considered. Thank you. And then drainage is a big one in my area.
Yeah, so if I can come in on the drainage matters, this is something that's being negotiated with relevant specialists within the county council. So the lead local flood authority will have been involved in those negotiations and discussions. So as part of that, there will be correspondence, I think, with the internal drainage boards, which I think are quite involved in the Swavesey area as well. So I think it's something that definitely is being taken into account. As to what is actually precisely included in that wording, we'd need to come back to you on, if that's okay.
Thanks. I'll probably talk to you later about that, because it also has to include local parish councils as well, because not all people are in a IDB. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Smith. Any other questions? Councillor Goldsack.
Thank you, Chair. Hopefully you can answer this one. Two parts to the question. I recognise where we're trying to go, and that this is, in fact, if I remember, a tripartite engagement between Homes England, South and County. Of those houses that were passed, do you know how many we've built to date and what the actual rollout timescales for this is? Because that has a huge impact on the people that are living there already and the future residents.
I'm able to circulate the exact figures after this, but I believe we're in the region of 1,000 occupations on Northstowe.
Right, 1,000 of how many houses were passed? I
I
think you said 4,000, didn't you?
Yeah.
So we're at a 25% build rate to where we should be. So therefore, are we looking at, what, a 10, 15-year build out for this?
Yeah, typical build rates are assume per house built about 250 units per year.
Just to come in on that as well, Colin has said that phase 1, bear in mind we're talking 3A and 3B in this paper, but phase 1 has hit 1,000 occupations.
Thank you.
Sorry, can I have a supplementary to that, please, Chair? Sorry,
Yes.
Emma, you may be able to help with this. That's 1,000 occupations. I accept that, and that's wonderful. Of how many houses built? Because if we built 3,000, then that's not good. If we've built 1,100 and 100 are just about to go on the market, that's great. I'm just concerned.
We're asking Colm that by relay. I'll call others in a minute once we've actually had the answer to that. I don't want us to be playing that panel game where we do the answer to the question before.
No, and I had a message from Tam Parry, who was saying that 1,000 have been built and 1,000 have been occupied. I'm just waiting for Colm to come back in. We don't have the precise number that have been built but not occupied, he's telling me.
Okay, thanks. I think if that is a particular concern, then we can ask for an answer to that outside the meeting. Now I'm seeing Councillors Gardner, Ray and Bradnam with questions, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it's a very quick question, mine. With regard to the sums that we're asking for, under libraries, you've got the sum is index linked, but you don't say that under the schools, the amounts for schools. So if the number of houses takes that much longer to get sold and what have you, then we could end up being short if those amounts are not index linked from the developer. So I would like to have, reassurance that those sums will be index linked.
Is that a question for Colm, I think, probably, rather than David?
So Colm says all sums will be index linked.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Ray.
Question again about schools. It states that there are 2-3 hectare sites. Are they included in the 13 million or are they additional? This is the cost of the value of the site.
Okay, thank Thank you. We'll relay that to Colin.
And a second point, is there any provision for sports facilities that will be available not only to the schools but also to the population, the residents?
Thank you.
Okay, so as part of that, Colin has said that the school sites are free, so they're handed over to the county council for the development. And normally what happens, because the schools tend to be one of the first things that are actually developed on a site, certainly when we're looking at placemaking, the schools actually become quite a central feature for the new communities. And as part of that, quite often within the planning permissions, there is discussions with Sports England about those facilities going wider than just the school and having like that public benefit. But Colin has said that sports will also be delivered by South Cambridgeshire District Council and also through the secondary school is the response that he's just typed back to me. So I hope that's helpful.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. And Councillor Bradnam.
Thank you, Chair. I haven't quite formed my question really, but it lies around the the pump priming for local bus service at item 6 on the heads of terms, page 32 of the agenda, and it relates to the fact that the trigger for these phases which we're talking about, which are 3A and 3B, it refers to 25% prior to occupation of the first dwelling in the phase, followed by annual payments of 25% for 3 more years unless agreed otherwise. I suppose what I wanted to ask was, has that same trigger applied to phase 1, and has there been pump priming for a bus to help the bus service for phase 1 already? Because if we've already heard that there's 1,000 occupations, then if there was a similar trigger for phase 1, has that come through? I suppose.
Thank you. That's another question.
So effectively what Colin is saying is that's one for Tam, who's online, or David. So hopefully David will take it first, but I'll message Tam.
If Tam could comment on the phase 1 arrangements, but what I would say about the nature of the triggers for these phases, we arrived at those in discussion with the combined authority, who's now the passenger service authority, and the 2 messages that they expressed to us is they wanted flexibility over the nature of the service provision that they provided, and they were comfortable with the 25% that would allow for the provision of a bus, and for that to then come in gradually. So we sought, and we will continue as we move into section 106 drafting, to seek the passenger transport authority in shaping that.
And just to say, I've actually caught up on a lot of stream from Tam as well, so I've got some answers to other questions. So when we were coming back to the, he was saying that there were 5,000 homes passed in phases 1 and 2, and the build out will be between 2025 and 2035 is when he's talking of timescales for these ones. He's saying that 1,000 houses have been built and occupied. They're being occupied as they're being built. So I don't think there's a suggestion that there are empty ones. So I think that comes back to Councillor Goldsack's point. He's also said that there'll be open space provision as part of the South Cambridgeshire District Council. So that goes back to the sports provisions. He's also said we have money from phase 1 already in relation to the bus services, but that's not been able to be spent yet. And they're waiting for more roads to be completed in phase 1 before the local bus services can be improved. So the money received so far cannot be spent just yet, but it's in. So Tam's done a really good job, if you can hear me, in answering a number of questions. So thanks, Tam.
Thank you very much indeed to all involved in answering those questions. I don't see any... Oh, another question. I was really hoping we could have got away with it. Councillor Gardner.
Sorry, Chair. Yes, yesterday I attended a presentation for the new Auchenbury Weald Secondary School and SEND School. On that particular site, they have got room to expand without having to look for a new site. And I just want clarification that this particular site, there is room for expansion as North Stowe develops in the same way as they have got at Auchenbury Weald.
Thank you. That's being relayed. We need Vivaldi's Four Seasons while we wait, don't we?
Just looking at section 2.13 of the report's quite useful. It sets out the heads of terms in relation to education, and it refers to expansion of facilities. So I'm sure a column can add to the detail of that, but it appears that that provision is I mean, we forecast the child yields to understand the likely number of young people that will need to be in the school and cater for that provision, and it appears that there is expansion is factored into those heads of terms.
Yeah, so according to column, we can expand from 4 FE to 12 FE with further funds being secured for a further expansion to 14 FE if needed. So it is something that's been discussed. I'm just asking whether that comes with the land. So I'm just waiting for his typed response to that. Yeah, land is already secured in the existing campus.
Okay, thank you very much. That's good to hear. I'm not seeing any more questions at this stage, so I'm going to open up the debate by formally moving the recommendations and seek support from my temporary acting vice chair. Thank you very much. So the debate will now open, but in doing so, I want to record a statement from Councillor Ferguson, who is the local member, who can't be here today, but who has asked that her brief statement be read out, which says that local parish councils still have concerns about particular flood and drainage issues and would ask the local lead flood authority to correspond with the local planning authority, South Cambs District Council, to ensure that these matters can be adequately resolved prior to the granting of the planning permission. So that very much ties in, I think, with Councillor Smith's questions earlier, and I'm asking officers, therefore, to take that away and keep us apprised on the issues there and the ongoing discussions between the LLFA and the local planning authority. Are we content with that? Yeah, okay. So I'm going to open the debate now on this. I'm conscious that we've all once again asked a lot of questions. Does anybody wish to make a contribution to the debate on the recommendations before I go to the vote? Appears not. So I'll move straight to the vote, therefore. Can I see those in favour of the recommendations? Thank you very much. Can I see any against and any abstentions? So that is unanimous. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, David. Thank you, Emma. Thank you, Colm by remote. And thank you to all those who have juggled the technology to make that possible. So we move on to item 6, therefore, which is the Community Flood Action Programme Riparian Maintenance Fund. And I believe we should, with any luck, have Quinton Carroll with us.
Yes, sorry, I'm just messaging him to come through. I'm afraid that was my fault because I've been trying to do 3 things at the same time.
No, I'm very impressed with the way you've managed to multitask this morning.
No, it's fine. He's ready. He was aware of the technical issues we've been having.
Okay, so we should have Quinton Carroll, Head of Service, to present the report. Quinton is Head of Service for Natural and Historic Environment, and we should also have Charles Crollick-Root for any technical questions, and Charles is in charge of the 1-year community flood programme that was initiated by this council and which is partway through its process.
Lovely. They've just confirmed they're walking on their way through now, so they'll both be in attendance and we'll sit at the back for you.
Okay, thank you very much. And here we are. Thank you very much indeed. So we have Quinton Carroll and Charles Crollick-Root with us, and Quinton is going to present the report, and Charles will be here to answer any technical questions, as I said earlier. So over to you, Quinton. Quinton, could you put your mic on, please? Just touch the little icon at the bottom.
Sorry about that. What we've come to present to you today is a key strand of the Community Flood Action Programme that we've been developing since the flood events of December last year. The actual programme is quite multifaceted, but one of the problems we identified in the December flood was the issues of riparian maintenance. Now, riparian maintenance is where a landowner has a watercourse on their land, a ditch, which forms part of that area's drainage system. And the landowner is responsible for keeping that ditch clear. These ditches sometimes get clogged, trees fall in them, backed up, and what can happen, a blocked ditch on one part of the road can back up and cause property flooding elsewhere. And this came out time and time again. So we're doing two things. One is we're developing guidance for riparian owners so they know what their responsibilities are. Too many people don't seem to know that they are responsible for clearing these ditches. And then the second strand is where we have complicated issues around them, where we might not know who the owners are, or it might be an absentee landlord, a failed business, but it's a known problem area. So what we set up is a mechanism for people to get help from the county council in clearing those ditches. So there's two elements to it, really. The first one is where you have an owner who, for whatever reason, financial, practical, simply doesn't know what to do or can't do it. They can come to us and apply for funding to get somebody in to do the work, and we can help them with that, or we can do the work for them. And the second one is where you have the absentee owners or unknown owners. And in that situation, we're developing a system by which a parish council or local flood group can come to us again and say, we know this is a problem in our parish, and we would like your help to sort it out. And we set aside a sum of money, which I know isn't in the report, but it's in excess of £300,000 to help these owners. The actual cost of clearing ditches are actually not that high. We don't anticipate any major sort of multi-thousands of pounds. Most of the time it's simply scraping them out. But we felt it would be very beneficial to be able to offer to help residents and community groups in this time. The mechanism we're going to use is a process by which people apply to us with the support of the county councillor, and we have criteria which are set out in the report against which we will score those applications. And that comes, it effectively works down to what's the most benefit we can get for the money spent. The actual legal agreement is still being finalised, the wording of which it needs to finalise by our legal team, but it's based on a mechanism under the Ancient Monuments Act called Section 17, which is the county council have been using for 25 years to issue small maintenance grants to landowners to do works. Effectively, it divides the application into two chunks, two schedules. So in return for somebody receiving a lump of some funding from us to do work on their riparian courses, they commit to keeping those water courses clear. So we do the initial hard work, they keep it clear. And that's a way of making sure that the ditches don't just reclog. So because this is a distribution of public money, when we discussed the programme previously, it was felt that the terms of reference of this should come to this committee for approval. So, and that's what you have before you.
Thank you very much indeed, Quinton. Before I move to debate, once again, I'm going to give members the opportunity to ask questions either of Quinton or of Charles. So I've seen Councillor Bradnam and then Councillor Corney and Councillor Howitt, and Councillor Ferguson. I'm going to need to write this down. And Councillor Smith. Right, okay, see if I can remember those in the same order. It's like Kim's game.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Quinton. My question to you is, I think this is a very pragmatic approach, and it deals with the situation as we are, which is important. But I wondered if, in addition to this funding, you are anticipating doing another piece of work at some stage. I know this is a bit preempting the thing, where the county council makes it clear to developers and solicitors, as it were, that when they do the first sale on a new development and subsequent sales of properties which do have riparian ownerships, that they are required to inform the new purchaser that they have a responsibility in this regard. I can think of one particular example, Banold Road in Waterbeach, where many owners, as you say, are unaware that they had a responsibility because the developer never told them, and perhaps didn't really accept it themselves, that they had a responsibility. So I just wondered, you know, in addition to this, are you thinking future work to engage quite rigorously with developers and those who sell properties on? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. That's a good point, actually. I don't think that's one we thought of, but it's certainly something we can pick up, because we're effectively producing a sheet on responsibilities of riparian owners, and certainly where developers are selling riparian responsibilities, then yes, that is something we can look at making sure that's known. So thank you for raising that.
Chair, may I? Thank you. I'm interested that that has not come across your thought process before, because it's absolutely evident to me that developers, those who know the area will know that Banold Road was developed as one of the during the lack of 5-year housing supply in South Cambs, and we had a lot of sequential developers taking up all of the plots down Banold Road. None of those developers have really taken a responsible attitude towards ongoing maintenance of the ditch which runs along the north of Banold Road, between on the edge of their properties and on the edge of Banold Road. And as a result, we've got a combination of lack of maintenance, lack of responsibility, a higgledy-piggledy combination of some residents sort of wanting to try and help, but actually most of them not believing they have any responsibility at all, because in fact one person who had the wit to actually ask, do I have any responsibility for that ditch, they were told by their solicitor, no, it's nothing to do with you. So, you know, there's a willful obstruction of this matter. Thank you.
Did you have any further observation to make on that, or Charles?
Yeah, hopefully the riparian guidance that we're preparing will cover off some of those issues, but I think there is a wider issue there with the conveyancing process and third-party data providers, and it might be something you could look at including in the local search, but that's definitely something that we need to address. Yeah.
Thank you. I think if we could give that some further thought, that would be very helpful. Councillor Corney, you're next.
Thank you, Chair. So I guess it's a point of clarity to start with, but then follow on to a question. But it's just whether the funding that we're talking about, whether that is purely just to be used to carry out the work, whether any of that funding will be used to find out who the riparian owners are of dikes, which is obviously a complicated matter. And the follow-up on that would be, if we get to that stage where we can discover who a riparian owner is, and we've spent money on clearing their dike, will we pursue them to put some money back into the pot?
this is an interesting one because what we can often find out who the riparian owners are through land searches, provided it's registered. It's ones that aren't, and that's where local knowledge, we would hope, would come in. That's why I want to involve parish councils and local councillors. There will be ones where we simply cannot find it, and yes, because what we would need to be sure of is whether the cost of recovery is worth what we get back, because in many of these we don't anticipate the actual spend being particularly high. But yes, again, it's a good point, and one we can take on board. Charles, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think the key thing to remember is that we are trying to alleviate the flood risk here, and I think we're trying to avoid spending money on trying, the bureaucracy in the background to some extent.
Sorry, Charles, could you pull the mic a little bit more towards towards the mic?
Sorry, can you hear me now? Yeah, I think we're trying to sort of alleviate flood risk is the end goal. So, and trying to avoid where we can sort of the spending money on the bureaucracy surrounding finding out who is in charge. I mean, the local land searches to find riparian owners are relatively cheap, and anyone can do those. So.
The supplementary from Councillor Corney.
Yeah, I completely appreciate, and it's a really, it's a great thing. I welcome this. We are trying to stop people's houses from flooding, but I guess from what you're saying is, we'll spend this money, we'll clear it, then we'll ask the local council to carry on. If that's not their responsibility, we're passing the buck, we're giving them a bill every time, and I think it's just, I don't know, at some point we really should be finding out who owns what. And I completely get, and I know we've done land searches ourselves in a couple of my local patches now, but and been unsuccessful. But it's just something to be mindful of, I think, and it's not fair to keep passing it down further to somebody else's problem.
Yeah, I think we need to be mindful of that. When we are doing the land searches, if there is a parcel of land that is not registered to anyone, that potentially presents an ongoing risk that we have to consider.
Thank you. Councillor Howitt is next with a question.
All right, thanks. Yeah, thank you. I do support this. By following on from the question that we just heard on my left, I would have thought in the criteria it would say that whoever's applying can't afford to do it themselves. For people who can't, this seems to be a very good idea, but we should make sure that where owners can do works, that they do works. And the point about what happens afterwards, recovering the money, there's the point about what happens before, so in terms of identifying owners, but I think you've at least partly answered that already, but I would urge you to make best efforts in relation to that. And lastly, could you, in the report, and you talk about you can improve the ecology at the same time, and you put that in the criteria as well. Could you give us some examples about how that can be done in this process? And thank you.
Yeah, so in the application form, the form's currently with the legal department who are reviewing it, but there will be a statement of fact in there. So the applicant has to declare that they are unable to carry out the works themselves, and then has to sign that document. So and then as part of the scoring criteria, there are different weightings for social and community benefits as well as ecological benefits. So ways that ecology could be improved may be You might have for example, a riverbank that has been destroyed by cattle, where they flatten it out, and you might want to be reinstating the steeper sides, which is therefore better for water voles, something like that. But
yeah, I mean, on many blocked riparian courses, it's often debris in there, litter, rubbish, fly tipping, and anything like that, which has ended up backed up in these ditches because it all washes in. So simply removing the contamination and debris and restoring it to some of that water can flow freely will be an ecological boost.
Okay, thank you. Next on my list, I have Councillor Ferguson.
Thank you, Chair. I think this is an excellent scheme. I represent a community which was flooded, had 3 serious flooding events in 2020. My only concern is making sure that we spend this money and that right people get access to it. So the criteria listed is that there is an established community flood action group in the area. Now, since lots of this flooding happened late in 2020 and we've had the coronavirus pandemic since then, I want to make sure that the definition of established is perhaps difficult, because lots of these groups will have been established recently and maybe to different levels. Some of them might be constituted, some of them might not be. So I think in his explanation, Quentin also mentioned parish councils, and I think it might be a good idea to also add parish councils to this, because you wouldn't want an area which had the greatest need not being able to receive the funding because its flood action group wasn't at the required level. So that's my big concern.
Thank you, Councillor. I think that's an error in the text, because we did originally want to link it to flood action groups, because another aspect of the wider programme is to encourage communities to develop these groups. Because again, the experience in 2020 showed that where there's an established community group with a flood plan, those communities respond better and more effectively to any flooding incident. Now, I agree with you, because we're pushing them hard, some of them might not be established or securely established as yet. That's why we introduced parish councils as an alternative. The important thing for us was to make sure that an application was of a community benefit. What we definitely want to avoid are individual landowners who can't be who don't want to live up to their responsibilities and think they can pass it on to us. So in effect, the applications have to have that community backing, and we will go for either a flood group or the parish council, and again with the support of the county councillor to say this is a genuine need.
Thank you very much indeed. I've got 4 members left on my list with questions, and I'm going to take them in the order. Councillors Smith, Gardner, Milnes and Councillor Bradnam would like a second bite at the cherry, and also Councillor Goldsack. So that's 5 members. So I'm going to go next to Councillor Smith.
Thank you. I'll be brief. Basically, has this gone out to members of the public yet about this fund?
No, it hasn't. We were waiting to get formal sign off. Everything is ready to go there.
Right, so, because basically they're being asked to fill in a survey, which I've got off one of my parish's websites. So the survey that they're being asked is nothing to do with this fund, no? Right, and also, what happens if the agreement, or the agreement that they go into, so like somebody gets funding for riparian ownership, they do not uphold the agreement and do not keep the maintenance going, what happens then? Do we have any sort of go back or come back? Because once you do it once, people will think it's going to be done all the time. That's what I would be concerned about. But don't get me wrong, I do support drainage issues, or sorting them out.
We have the right to reclaim the money from them in the agreement. If it's not there, we can pursue them for the return of the funding. Either if the work up front isn't done, or if they then fail to adhere to the maintenance. Furthermore, what we don't want them is to come back to us 2 years later and go, oh, it's blocked again.
So that's what I would be concerned about. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And just to be clear on the questionnaire, Councillor Smith, I mean, that and this fund and other things are different parts of this whole one-year programme. So they're part of a coherent programme. They're just not necessarily one leading directly to the other. It's a,
all right, no, that's fine. Thank
approach. Councillor Gardner was next.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I would like to thank the officers for all their assistance in my division, particularly in Alconbury and Alconbury Western, which were severely flooded just before Christmas. It is greatly appreciated by me and the community and various other villages throughout my division which suffered severe flooding. You know, in Alconbury we had in excess of 100 houses flooded, as the officers know. My main question, question really is to you, is with regard to this money, if the riparian owner is the county council, will you be looking in those flood areas, like say Alconbury, for example, will you be looking to do that work on your sections of land where the county council is the owner?
Firstly, can I thank you for your thanks, and I'll make sure that gets passed on to the team. The fund is there to help people who can't help themselves, and I have to say I personally will consider the county council, where it's a riparian owner, to be capable of undertaking the works, even if they have to request advice from our specialist teams on exactly how to do it.
Can I quickly have a...
Let's come back, yes.
So, if the county council then is the riparian owner in a known flood area, are we then saying that the county council will do that work as soon as it possibly can?
If there is a riparian watercourse that is causing a flood, regardless of who the owner is, they will be contacted and told that they are responsible for clearing that ditch. Whether that's owned by a public body, private body or a business, we do contact them to say this ditch is your responsibility and it is causing a problem, you are liable for it. So it will be this, we would treat it the same as whoever the owner is.
Thank you very much, Quinton. Councillor Mills.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the proposal. I think any of us that were involved in whatever capacity in the recent winter last December, will recognise that there is a real problem with the drainage system across the county. We've got fragmentation, as you've described, so this is a really good response, so thank you for that. I've got personal experience of a new development with riparian owned ditches alongside it, where there was the ignorance that you were talking about. Homeowners had no idea that they were responsible, so we contacted I as local ward member walked the ditches with your officers who were very helpful in this process, so we know how long it can take. So I've got some reservations about the amount of resources you've got to do this, because we've got a very large county and an awful lot of ditches and all sorts of different bodies involved. You mentioned the internal draining board. So I wonder whether we can have a 12-month review date on this programme to see how it's gone, see how it's working out in practice, and I think the issue of new developments for me is a critical one, so that we, and I don't know how you would monitor planning applications coming forward across all the districts, so that we make sure that we establish a programme of maintenance of those riparian ditches between the two landowners. Often will be the case, because they typically are on the boundary line of a new development. So if you could just generally respond to those, please.
I've been thinking about the new development aspect since Councillor Bradnam raised it, and it's been back up on my mind. And as lead local flood authority, we do review planning applications above a certain threshold, but that doesn't pick up, obviously, small ones. I'm wondering whether there's something that can be factored into planning conditions that are attached to developments to say, and the developer must inform owners. But I need to discuss that with my specialists in that area of planning. In terms of the ongoing future of the programme, the funding allocation is for a 12-month programme, and we would report back to this committee on hopefully how successful it's been. I'm very confident in this. But I am aware that we have quite a narrow window where we can work on watercourses, and I've already had discussions with about extending the programme to in some form beyond the initial 12 months. And yes, certainly we would report back.
And I think you'll know you have the support of your local districts in this. In my own case, South Cam is very keen to help do that. So please continue with that collaboration with them.
Thank you. Councillor Bradnam and then Councillor Goldsack.
Thank you, Chair. Two questions. The first might seem quite minor, but how will you avoid fraudulent claims? Are you anticipating checking these claims of not being able to afford to do the work? And that could be quite time-consuming and use your money in a bureaucratic way rather than doing the work, as you said. And the second question is, many ditches run across or past or across the frontage or the side of many different land ownerships. So one ditch can be in multiple ownership. So how are you going to get around that complicated business of how the costs will be divided? And I think what you're proposing is very practical, because what you're saying is we'll do the work, we'll sort out who should have paid for it in the first place separately. But I just think there's that element of it. And indeed, in the most simple of cases, as Councillor Milne says, there's often at least one owner when the ditch is by the road, but there's two owners where there's boundaries, and then multiple when the ditch goes across lots of different properties.
The issue of fraudulent applications, it's a risk. We know that. And to a certain extent, we're trying to mitigate that risk by requiring local support. Because whether that's from Parish Council, Flood Group, and from the local county councillor, and we would anticipate that the requirement for that support would rule out a lot of fraudulent claims. I have to say, I've been doing Section 17 agreements for 20 years, and I've not once had a fraudulent one, because and the scrutiny on that is less than on that we're proposing here, because often people are genuinely just want to get a problem sorted, and what we're offering is a way of resolving that problem, which comes kind of out as the same answer to your point about multiple owners. Yes, you're right. You can have a long ditch could have half a dozen different owners, one of which could be the county council if it's alongside a highway. And those are the ones where I'd anticipate the situation being so complicated that we just get agreement to go in and clear it, if I'm honest, because it will be simpler than trying to get 6 people to coordinate work at the same time. So I suspect that's going to be down to the more diplomatic members of the team to negotiate.
Thank you very much indeed, Quinton. And going back to the question about new developments, I think that raises in itself the question of the LLFA being content to see applications which create new multi-owner riparian responsibilities running through the middle of new developments, and that's something that we've got to consider, particularly where it's in people's, at the end of the people's gardens and over their back fence or back hedge, which will create additional problems as well. And that's something I think we need to look at in the round as an issue. Councillor Goldsack.
Thank you, Chair. Just a number of points. I'm hoping they're quick ones. Point 1. Do you envisage, as I fear, a number of right to damage claims from riparian owners. So we go public with this. We're public today, and House A was affected by House D, and their insurance company paid out to fix the problems from their flooding last year. We've now said they were caused by House D not fixing their riparian lights, and it's their responsibility. This could be a cascade of insurance companies clawing back money, because I'm telling you, if they can, they will. That's point one. The second point, I've heard it mentioned 2 or 3 times around the room by various members of various groups. I don't think anybody particularly likes the phrase, but we're almost looking at means testing for this, aren't we? We're almost looking at a means-tested measurement here to say who can and who can't have this. Point 3, I would very, very much welcome an output of this being a drive to update land registry. We completely understand there's an awful lot of property out there that still remains unregistered on land registry. So if you are finding and doing your research, I think it would be a really, really useful exercise to follow that through and make sure red lines on maps are future-proofed. Next one, 1.2D, you mention infiltration of surface water into foul systems. I believe, and I'm speaking to officers about this, I believe across our county we now have a problem with the narrow bore pipe load bearing beneath the roads. So we've got many of these have got 5-inch pipes around, and with the amount of rainfall that we're getting now, we're seeing property damage, not because the system, well basically because the system can't cope at a pace to get rid of the water quick enough. Therefore it's causing puddling on highways, damage to highways and damage to close located properties. That's a huge area and a huge concern for the residents of Cambridgeshire, and that's something we need to be taken into consideration. And lastly, this may be more for the debate, but I'll ask the officers for their opinion if I can. You mentioned in 1.2C budget cuts. The last admin didn't cut the budget. Largely, the budget was unspent by the Highways Division. So what I'd like to know is what that underspend has had on the impacted flood areas. So therefore, what was the underspend from highways actually impacted the residents last winter? Sorry for the number of questions, but I tried to keep them short because some people have answered some of the other ones I've got, so thank you.
Okay. On your first point about the insurance companies are already aware of riparian responsibilities, and we do when we issue the reports that go out, Section 19 reports after floods. We often get inquiries from insurance companies along those lines. So this already is on their radar. I don't think we're going to be unleashing a torrent of counterclaims or people or insurance companies trying to claw it back.
And do you not think, sorry, Chair, through you, please, do you not think that could at least open up an opportunity for more claims against the council?
I'm not sure why that would be a claim against the council, unless it's one of our ditches.
Unless we found one of our ditches, yeah.
We are a riparian landowner. We have riparian responsibilities. Just trying to think of any that came out of the December one. I've got one at the moment where the resident is trying to claim from us, but it just refers straight back to our insurance company to let them talk to the residents' insurers. The means testing one, I'm going to ask Charles to answer that one because he's been involved in the detail. Drive to update land registry, yes, that's a good idea. We'll take that one on board. The point about infiltration in 1.2D, that is, I think that's beyond. That is a wider issue around flooding in the county that involves more than just Charles and myself and all sorts of other agencies. The point we're trying to make by citing that is that the blocked riparian courses were contributing to this pooling of water that you were describing, and that water getting into the foul system, either by just seeping through, or in some cases, residents will take the manhole covers off, not realising they're opening the foul system to let the water flow away. That's a real problem. So what we're trying to do is reduce the factors that get infiltration into the foul system by keeping the ditches clearer. Your point about unspent highways budget, I'm probably not the person to answer that one, but I can probably get you an answer. Yeah. And so the final, the other one, the issue about means testing, we do refer to it in here, but have you got any comment on that, Charles?
Yeah, well, we did sort of explore means testing, but we thought, given that the programme is only set to run currently for 12 months, and we have a relatively small window to carry out the works through the winter on the watercourses, and the means testing is a potential barrier to actually getting anything done because it's so long-winded. And if in a situation, as we've already mentioned, where you may have 6, 7, 8 riparian owners along one stretch of watercourse, do they all then have to be means tested because to prove that one of them is unable to carry out their maintenance on a financial basis? And we didn't feel that we would actually end up achieving what we're looking to achieve through this section of the programme.
Okay, thank you. And Steve Cox wanted to come back on one of those questions.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It was on the point about the highways spend. It is something that we constantly look at, and we're looking at any underspends that there were last year. I am aware that some of the funding wasn't confirmed until quite late into the financial year, and decisions were taken around pothole funding, for example, 4.2 million, on how to spend that quite late into the autumn last year. So if there was underspends, that will have been one of the causes, but it is something we're having a look at. I don't know of a direct link between underspends and flooding, but it's something we can have a look at.
Thank you very much indeed. I think that is now questions done. So to open the debate, I'll move the recommendation, which is that we approve the recommended approach for riparian maintenance funding, and I look for Councillor Howitt to second. Thank you. So with that now on the table for debate, can I see any speakers for debate on this? Councillor Goldsack, Councillor King.
Thank you, Chair. Look, I think this is a great move in the right direction and much needed. I think I really hope I'm wrong in that I feel it's a band-aid over an open wound, and we need maybe a bigger. We're still, I believe, we haven't yet seen the flood review full project plan. Is that correct? There's a flood review that was started earlier this year, and that hasn't come out yet, has it?
There's been a programme of there's been individual section 19, I think it is, reviews into individual areas which are being published as they conclude, and a number of those have already been published, I think, including Alconbury and Alconbury Western. But there is ongoing work by the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Flood and Water Partnership to review all of the issues, and that has been ongoing and continuing, and there is a web page on the council website about that.
Okay.
Its work.
Okay. Right. The point I'm trying to make is residents in March, residents in Alconbury, residents in St Neots, residents all over Cambridgeshire were impacted last year. Right. I don't want the residents to sit there and feel that the council are trying but it's a band-aid over an open wound. I think we've got to get more message, more comms out there as to what we are doing and actually support these residents in this. I think this is a step in the right direction. I will be supporting it, but I just think we need to be bigger, bolder and do more and really focus on this. And I'll come back to the point that I raised in mine, and I will be raising again at a future date. We've got to have a serious look at surface water management to get it away. I'm afraid the infrastructure is from the 1950s and the 1960s in loads of places with a less than 5-inch bore pipe to get the water away. It cannot cope with the downfall we're getting at this moment in time. And without a serious investment in that area, this just won't happen. the surface water just will not go away, and lives will continue to be impacted. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor King.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I really like this. I'm really supportive of this. I think it's definitely a move in the right direction. But I do think it opens up a wider issue that this committee needs to take really seriously. And that's that whilst we're making residents take responsibility for their own property and their own actions, the county council really needs to take more responsibility for its own land and what it does to resolve the flooding issues. We have got, for an example, I've heard from a highways officer that the drainage contractors we use are 4 to 5 months behind schedule with no clear plan to fix that problem. Steve Cox just mentioned that he doesn't see the link between an underspend and flooding. Well, surely if you don't spend the money fixing those problems, then the flooding is going to keep happening. So I think the council needs to get its own ducks in line before we start enforcing things on other people. And I think that's a really serious issue that we need to look at.
Thank you. Yes, Councillor Corney.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I too also welcome this. I think this is a great step in the right direction. I agree with some of my colleagues. To be fair, I think it's a very complicated issue as well, and this is just a first step. I think we look at the time of the year we're at now. We're now saying that we're going to be putting this out to the public. I think the flooding season is pretty much upon us already, isn't it? How that seems to be the pattern of things now. I think it's a drop in the ocean. Pardon the pun, but I think we need at least this again for next year, because I'm frightened to say it, but I think I can see we're going to be looking at the same issues this winter, because we're not going to get round in time to get these things sorted out. And it's just I think a couple of the colleagues have sort of already touched on sort of maybe pre-start conditions to developments. I think making sure developers know that they pass on the information about the riparian ownership of a dike or a drain that runs at the back of their property. I think we should go further than that. I think developers on a larger scale, or on any scale really, if there's a riparian ditch or a drain or a dike, they should be made to clean that out before they even start. So that not only are they handing over the correct information to the new owner of the property, they're actually handing it over in a good condition in the first place. And Chairman as well, so we sit together on the combined authority on the scrutiny, and you've heard me more than once bleat on about rainwater harvest systems on new properties and things like that. I think these are all the sort of things that we should be doing. These are mini attenuation systems for every property that's built, and if we can hold water back, it's going to be a good thing. But I shall certainly support this today.
Thank you very much. Councillor Milnes is next.
Yeah, just a quick, and I absolutely recognise what you're saying about developers, and I've actually had good experience locally in my patch where developers have actually cleaned out the ditches, put vegetation in to keep the banks secure and so on, and indeed on further planning applications in the area, developers have agreed to do the same thing. So there is some willingness from some developers, and often the considerate constructor scheme, indicates willingness to help the local community. So we need to do as much of encouragement as that as possible. But I'm absolutely supportive of this, and I think that this time next year, if we can have a review and look at an extension of this, because I don't think we're going to cover this in the next 12 months. So for me, this is the first step in getting a system established where these riparian rights are understood and dealt with accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bradnam.
Thank you, Chair. I've got 2 points. One is I sit, as other members I'm sure do, I sit on the internal drainage board responsible for the Waterbeach area, and what we are aware is that we are a fen-edge community in Waterbeach, and indeed the IDB area covers, of course, as you know, Waterbeach, the Old West, and areas further north and to the east. But one of the things that we have to be aware of is that being a Fenedge community, sometimes our responsibility is to allow land to flood in order to prevent the flooding of properties downstream. So we can all be busily digging out our ditches and which has the effect of making them flow faster, and that means flowing into the river. But we need to be mindful that sometimes our responsibilities lie in a slightly different direction, and that is to accept that land may need to flood in order to protect property. By that I mean houses and dwellings. So there's that balance to be had. And as an aside to that, sometimes for some of us, and certainly in my area this winter, the flow levels in the River Cam, and you'll all be aware that often the river taking the water to the sea is at a higher level than the ground, the land, and our pumping stations are pumping up into the rivers to alleviate the flooding on land. So, but often we're in a situation where that flow into the river is ambient. And if the flow in the river is very fast, because the river level is full, our ditches are unable to discharge into the river because it's almost like the flow running into a brick wall. So there's this to be borne in mind. So that's one thing. I wanted to alert the officers of that balance between what we as riparian landowners may be doing, increasing the flow of water, but that might have the effect of water going more quickly into a more vulnerable area. And also, as a little subset of that, certainly on our very flat Fenedge land, often what our ditches are intended to do is not take water anywhere, it's just to provide a lower channel into which water can drain. It doesn't particularly flow in my division. Some of the ditches don't flow in any particular direction. They're just there as a sink to allow the water to flow off the land and rest there until such time as the water can flow into the groundwater. And we know that part of the problem this winter was that the groundwater levels were exceedingly high, unusually high. I had one gentleman who, in his 80s, who in his particular area, he said, I've lived in this house for 45 years and I've never had my garden flood to this level. So this is the sort of thing. That's the first point. It's about the balance between flow and allowing water to rest.
Councillor Bradnam, can I ask you to be as brief as possible? We have a lot of other business to do.
My second point is that we need to be aware of our developers, and this comes down to a district council level. When developing land, we need to be mindful that any development that land raises, as many of our developers do in order to avoid the risk of flooding, that land raising equally has an effect on the land around it. And we need to be very mindful that anything we do on land in our ownership, or that developers do on their land, should not increase the risk of flooding to neighbouring property, either immediate neighbours or downstream. So I just think we need to be aware of those responsibilities in this balance. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Councillor Gardner.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yes, I fully support this proposal. I would just like to add, though, that I do think we need to be working with Anglian Water, the Environment Agency and the IDB. I am a member of the Auchenbury and Ellington IDB. So, because if we don't, I have a situation in one of my villages whereby a developer has put their surface water is now being pumped into, or not pumped, but actually directed into a highways drain, which cannot cope. The Anglian water system cannot cope, and what happened at Christmas is the whole sewerage system flooded and ended up, we had sewage water all outside the local school in Brinkton, and the headmaster was out there trying to sweep and push sewage away from where the children were having to try and access the school. Now, I believe we need to go further, as I've said. and we need to work with both Anglian Water and the Environment Agencies to try and stop this sort of rogue behaviour going on in certain villages where they're not checked regularly. So I welcome the fact that the lead flood officers are arranging a meeting with Anglian Water to discuss the situation, to try and get the situation rectified, because I do believe it is something that needs to be rectified sooner rather than later, because we shouldn't have that situation outside a primary school. So, you know, I'm fully in support, Chair, and I would just like to make all members aware of the certain situations that are going on across the county.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Gardner, and to those other members who've contributed to this debate. I will now sum up just by reminding members that this is just one of a number of initiatives that is taking place under the Community Flood Programme, which Charles is in charge of, and that piece, that whole set of work is also a subset of a number of other pieces of work that are going on, including the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Flood and Water Partnership, work with various other agencies, the work of the IDBs and others responsible for their own water courses and riparian responsibilities. So this is part of a suite of projects that's going on, and all the more welcome for that. In retrospect, it is very clear that the decision made a number of years ago by this authority to cease cyclical maintenance of and clearing of gullies was disastrous in terms of the effect on local communities, and I'm glad that we're now beginning to put that back in place as it should be. So with that in mind, I haven't heard any dissent from the recommendations. Can I see those in favour of the recommendations, please? Can I see those against the recommendations? Can I see those abstaining on the recommendations? One abstention. Thank you very much indeed. That is very clearly carried. Now, we've been at this for nearly 2 hours, which is the point at which I need to give us all a break. I'm going to propose a 10-minute break now rather than launch into the next item. But when we come back, I would like to remind members that we have completed items 1 to 6 out of 13 items so far, and it's taken 2 hours to do that. I would appreciate it if we could all be as succinct as possible for the remaining items on the agenda, otherwise we'll be here till Christmas. Thank you very much indeed, and see you in 10 minutes. Right, I'm going to have to call this meeting back to order. We've had our 10 minutes and we have a very tight agenda. And once again, I would remind people, please be as succinct as you possibly can. Otherwise, we'll be here for a very long time. I'm going to move on to item 7 now, which is the Anglian Water Cambridge Wastewater Treatment Plant Relocation Project. And I see that we have David Carford with us, so I'm going to ask David, who's the project manager, to present this report to us. Thank you.
Thank you. With this paper, there's two main parts to it. The first is we're sharing a officer response to recent consultation Anglian Water held, and we're seeking endorsement of that response. And further to that, two further recommendations relate to seeking delegated authority, which relates to this project being an NSIP project, a national... thank you. And as such, it will go to the Planning Inspectorate and is determined by the Secretary of State. So there's a set process there and timelines that we are to meet. And we're just establishing the delegation authority so that we're able to meet those timetables where there isn't enough time allowed to take it to this committee. Just very briefly, the proposal from Anglian Water is relocation of its Cambridge wastewater treatment plant, which is currently on Cowley Road to the north of Cambridge. The proposal is to relocate it to the north of the A14, near to junction 34 of the A14 itself, just south of Horningsea. The relocation of the works, it's important to recognise, enables the North East Cambridge development and delivery of circa 8,000 homes and a further 20,000 jobs. The North East Cambridge development is currently being drafted. There's an area action plan that the district councils are doing for that development. So of course it's key that the current location is vacated to allow that development to come forward. Anglian Water's proposals include establishing new habitats, wildlife, and improving access to the countryside with various footpaths and access routes. There's also significant landscaping proposed, as they've currently shown it, and also there's going to be a discovery centre there as well for education opportunities. So, as I mentioned at the beginning, this is an NSIP project. It will be seeking development consent order. As such, it does go to the Secretary of State for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs. The Planning Inspectorate then carries out certain functions in relation to that, including examination of all the proposals that come forward. Local authorities are statutory consultees in their own right, and also we have a key role in providing local knowledge and informing the Inspectorate of all local knowledge as it comes forward, and how the proposals by Anglian Water meet various policies. Anglian Water to date have undertaken 2 consultations. The first was last year in the summer, an informal consultation in which they shared 3 potential sites to relocate to. Following that, this summer, they consulted again on their preferred site, of which then officers responded. There was a series of technical fact sheets that they provided, and our officers went through those, and the response that's in Appendix 3 is the response that we gave to Anglian Water. Anglian Water are aware that it's going to this committee today, so they were aware that that was an officer response, and indeed any comments here will be taken back to them.
Thank you very much indeed, David. And as usual, but with brevity, any questions, please, that members may have for David on the report? Even briefer than I had hoped. Thank you very much indeed. So the recommendations are firstly to endorse the proposed officer technical response to Anglian Water. Secondly and thirdly, and this is now standard procedure when we are responding to national strategic infrastructure projects, to delegate authority to the executive director in consultation with the chair or vice chair of the committee, where there is not time for a report to come to this committee, and where that delegated power is used to circulate the draft response to local members and members of the committee in advance of sign-off and submission. So those are the recommendations. I'd like to move those from the chair and again seek the support of my acting temporary vice chair. Thank you very much indeed. So that's now on the table for discussion, and I'd like to see speakers. So Councillor Smith, you were indicating and then changed your mind, I think. Yes. Okay. Councillor Goldsack.
NSIP seems to be growing in popularity. I see it as a way of avoiding local scrutiny. Can we be absolutely assured in supporting the recommendations that we absolutely maximise the feedback of local scrutiny on this? This isn't the most critical NSIP project here, but waste incinerators in Wids Beach, Sunica in my area, etc., etc. You know, they all are, without a shadow of a doubt, an attempt to get around local scrutiny and local planning rules, and they're not a full democratic process, in my opinion.
I'm not sure that's a question to the officer. Steve Cox is going to...
Sorry, you opened up the debate. There were no questions to the officer.
Sorry, there weren't. You're absolutely right. Steve Cox.
I was just going to echo what Councillor Goldsack has said. Emma and colleagues have been doing a lot of work on, we know there are a lot of NSIPs coming through. East West Rail is another one, the A428 is a live one. So we have got a team now in place that will be making sure that we are responding promptly, accurately, and making sure the best possible points are made to look after the interests of the county's communities on each and every one of those schemes that comes through. They're all really important. They're all big by their very nature, and we will make sure we deal with them in the best way possible.
Thank you very much, Steve. And yes, I would agree. We are being absolutely beset by NSIP projects on all sides at the moment. So that is a real issue for this authority in a number of ways. Do I have any other speakers on this? Councillor Bradnam.
Thank you. I must declare, sorry, I can't remember if I realised there were a number of things on the agenda for which I need to declare that I'm the local member for, and this is also in my county division. One of the things I was particularly concerned about, we are in debate, aren't we, Chair? Thank you. Under option 3, sorry, we're looking at the transport routes, which the access options, which are on pages 77 and 78 of the agenda. I was particularly concerned. I have been campaigning for the...
Councillor Bradman, could you pull the microphone a little nearer?
Sorry, certainly. Yeah, sure. It's difficult because I'm looking at the chat, but you're all there. So, hang on, sorry, just give me a moment to find it. Yeah, option 3. So the access routes envisage 3 options, 1A and 1B, which use the local highway network of Horningsea Road, the B1047. Option 2, which I'm very glad, I'm really relieved that the officers have discounted that as the least preferred route, because it not only takes lorries over High Ditch Road, which is an ancient Roman road, but it's a very narrow road and it has very few sensible places to pass. It's got a restriction over a railway width-wise, and also that presents a grounding hazard, and it would mean lorries going over the A14 on an agricultural accommodation bridge, which we're informed would be possible, but we do not think that's a sensible option, and nor do the officers, so I'm very relieved about that. But option 3, which is what the residents would dearly like to have, envisages a direct access, a new direct access off the A14. And officers have taken advice from Highways England, who have said that current policy restricts the construction of new junctions on strategic roads of national importance unless there's no clear alternative using existing accesses, comma, or, I think they mean, or it connects with the local road network and is ideally developed through a local plan-making process. I found that sentence slightly difficult to understand, actually, but the point being that local residents would dearly like this option 3 to be given some serious consideration. 2 things about that. One is it would mean all of the construction traffic and the subsequent tanker traffic, which will bring, as it currently does, tanker loads of sewage to the site, it would take those off the local small roads. The road from the A14 junction north into Horningsea is a 7.5 tonne weight limit, and one of the options A and B both have lorries and tankers going along that road for a small distance, admittedly, but going along that. But it also puts them into association with all the village traffic between the villages of Fenderton and Horningsea, which they would dearly like to avoid. The other point, which has not been mentioned here, is that in one of the options, and forgive me, I can't remember which one, but it's where it goes straight over from the slip road into the land ahead. That is actually, I guess, a 10 to 20 foot drop from the raised land over which approaches the bridge over the A14 to the land below. In other words, these vehicles would be high relative to the surrounding land, and thus the noise of them would carry for a long way. That's one point. The second point is that we've been advised that Highways England don't like this concept of having a direct route off the A14. But the point is, this would only affect the lorries going to and from this site. They would still be able to, regardless of whether they were coming from the east or west, they would still be able to access. They would need to turn round at the junction 33 outside Milton if they wanted to go north to it, but east to it. But it would still be possible. And I'm confused by the sentence that says, from a local perspective, a new junction is likely to create different travel patterns for vehicles avoiding Newmarket Road or providing a convenient route to the east of Cambridge. This would be considered undesirable. And I do not understand where that sentence has come from, because I do not recognise this potential direct access having that effect, and I cannot understand why that sentence has been put in, so I'd like some clarification on that, please, because I cannot see any influence of that of that description happening because of this proposed direct access of the A14.
Can I ask to a close, please?
That's my question.
Right, we're back to questions again. That could have been a question under questions to officers, I think, but I will ask David Carford to respond to that, please, very quickly.
If I can, Chair, we've actually got Jez Tuttle here, who is actually from the Transport Assessment Team. He's come deliberately to ensure that any such questions can be answered.
Thank you. In that case, Jez, could I ask you very briefly to respond to that question about the statement about option 3?
Through the Chair. When we were looking at the beginning of the options, there was a couple of options for access off the A14. One was a full movements junction and one was this slip junction. Because we didn't know the precise location of those, there was a possibility that they might actually link into local roads, because the indicative one on the plan, it shows an indicative access in a location, but we don't know that that will actually be the location of the access. Highways England, if they were to support the access, might say that it needs to be somewhere else. So what we were saying was, we're almost saying that, you know, there is a possibility that such an access of the A14, if it linked to the local roads, would actually start to form a rat-running route for traffic coming from elsewhere. Now, if it was in the position shown exactly on the plan, obviously it wouldn't do that. It would only serve the sewage works itself. But I think we were trying to cover an eventuality when we gave that set of comments.
Thank you very much. So very, very briefly, Councillor Bradnam.
Could I just observe that, thank you for your clarification, but the sentence is ambiguous, which is why I've asked the question. And so I think, please, could we give some thought to actually adding in some wording around, if not in the position indicated on the option 3 plan, this could have the effect. In other words, I see no reason why we couldn't look at the option 3 plan, because I don't see it having the effect that you're anticipating. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. I don't see any other speakers, I think, so I'm going to sum up on this. Thank you very much for your contributions to this. I did mean to apologise for the grocer's apostrophe in recommendation B, and I'd like to assure you that I have got an appointment at the Senate House this afternoon to hand back my English degree, so thank you very much for that. But thank you very much indeed for the debate. Thank you to officers for their clarifications. I'd like to put this now to the vote, if I may. Can I see all those in favour? Against? Abstentions? That is very, very clearly carried. Thank you very much indeed. Move on then to item 8, which is the low carbon heating project at Burwell House. And we have Sarah Wilkinson with us, who is the energy manager, to present this report. I'll just let Sarah get settled, and also Cheryl French. Thank you very much, and when you're ready.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. The Council has a target to reduce the organisation's carbon emissions by 50% by 2023. And this paper presents a proposal to replace the gas-fired boilers at Burwell House with low-carbon air source heat pumps, along with new radiators. It's part of a programme of retrofits already underway at several other sites. This project would deliver carbon savings of around 24 tonnes CO2 equivalent per year, making a valuable contribution to our climate targets. Currently, heating our buildings with oil and gas accounts for around 61% of our Scope 1 and 2 emissions. The project is one of 21 that was awarded grant funding from the Public Sector Decarbonisation Scheme, and the grant is worth about £280,000 towards the cost of this project. However, a condition of the grant is that we have to spend the money by March 2022. The project cost is expected to be around £450,000, excluding contingency. However, there is a chance that if the contingency sums allowed for in the budget are all needed, the total costs before the grant could be up to £511,000, which would exceed the £500,000 limit of delegated responsibility previously agreed. For this reason, committee approval is sought to ensure that we continue to meet the investment criteria for this programme. The grant covers over half of the project costs, with the balance coming from the Environment Fund. Revenue costs of energy used at the site would reduce by around £460 a year from this project, and overall the project would pay back in 15 years when compared to a like-for-like replacement, and including the value of carbon as agreed last year. If we proceed with this project, though, it will still be extremely challenging to meet the delivery timetable required by the grant conditions, and there will also be some disruption to the site staff and visitors during the works. However, if we don't proceed with this project, we would need to hand back the grant money and may still need to decarbonise the site in future in order to meet our climate commitments. It is also likely that the heating would need replacing anyway in the next 5 years or so. I therefore recommend that the committee approve the investment case and proceed with this project, noting the risks set out in the paper. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Sarah. Members, are there any questions? Councillor Milnes and Councillor Gardner.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just ask a question? If where buildings are moved to ground or air source heat pumps, then typically you would want an associated strengthening of insulation around the windows and so on. My recollection of Burwell House from when my children went there was that wouldn't describe the current situation. I don't know if it's changed since they were there, and just perhaps you could comment to that. Thank you.
So the windows at Burwell House were actually replaced last year, so it's now got double glazing, much better.
Thank you. Councillor Gardner.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yes, my question is with regard to 2.19, with regard to the Grafham Water Residential Centre, as I am the local member for there. I assume from the comment there you've received the public sector decarbonisation grant, but you've now handed that back because you don't feel that you can do the work there. Can you explain why the council has decided not to undertake the work at the Grafham Water Centre?
Well, there's a number of reasons, mainly because it's a much larger and much more complex project, but Cheryl may want to add to that if that's okay.
There was also the perception that the buildings currently are in need of some additional works, the energy efficiency as an example. And so we're looking to see if we could push that back, because the varieties of work that would be required within the grant timeline just wouldn't be met.
Yep.
So I can understand your view there. So we've now forgone the grant there for that particular site then, because we can't meet it in the time scale.
Actually, quite interesting, just hot off the press yesterday, I think, we heard back from Salix to say, could we use that grant on the other projects that we're currently bringing forward? So what we're trying to do is to see if there's any other benefits we can bring to the other projects to spend that money, so that it's not forgone, it's just not going into Grafham yet. Yep.
One final question then, Chair. When will you be applying for another grant for the Grafham Water Centre as the local member, so that you can do these jobs in the future, i.e. the low carbon heating, and of course it needs double glazing and what have you in certain rooms, especially like the upstairs offices where it's only single glazed and what have you. So are we going to look to do that in the future, or are we now totally stop that?
Certainly we'll be looking to apply for further public sector decarbonisation grants in the future, because we have a whole variety of buildings that need to be upgraded. In terms of those come through from government, the next round is October. We see that as being a potentially annual process of putting forward grant applications. So certainly there's the potential of other buildings and Grafham going forward at a later date.
Thank you. Councillor Goldsack.
Yeah, just a quick one. Brian, like you, I've had years of taking children, and in fact, even going there as a child myself, Burwell House has been going that long. I was very proud of the work that was undertaken last year, and did a really fine job on a wonderful building. Really, really good. My question on this one, we all know, and we're all hearing, we're all reading, that if you go out and buy steel today, or go out and buy wood today, the price has changed tomorrow if you haven't got that as a fixed delivery. The cost of delivery, cost of transportation, the cost of everything is very variable. We are quoted on here. Can you assure us there are some safeguards on those quotes? Or can I suggest that if there is a variance over a certain allowable area, this comes back to us, because obviously the costs are even though we've got quotes, are still relatively unknown. That's the problem with the current environment.
Yes, I can answer that. So the quote is fixed for the works in the specification. The contingency, however, is in the budget for things that maybe unforeseen. So there's always a possibility that when you get to site, you find things that you hadn't included for. It could be asbestos, it could be something else that you don't know until you actually start work. So that's why we've allowed for a contingency sum.
I can just come back. I'd be pretty disappointed after all the work that's gone on at Burwell House in the last 3 years to find that we haven't identified any asbestos risk. But your point's fair, and the fact that the quotes are set is encouraging.
Thank you very much. Councillor Hathorn.
So there's obviously a technical energy review of these buildings when these projects are being planned. Is the opportunity taken to ask the users of the centre to perform an energy review so that the behaviour of the users can be kick-started into improving and lowering energy?
That's a really good idea. It's not something that we've done so far, but we do monitor the actual usage of the building, both for electricity and gas, and we'll continue to do that after the project as well.
Just to add to that, so there have been campaigns in the past where we've worked on energy efficiency campaigns. We haven't done more recently on the buildings, so that would be something that should be done, and certainly would be something that would be something we'd like to do in the future when we get more capacity.
Thank you very much indeed for that. So we have the recommendations in front of us, which are to approve the investment case, proceed with the project, note the project risks, and delegate the decision to go into contract. I'd like to propose that from the chair. That is seconded by Councillor Howitt. So I'm going to open that up for debate. Does anybody have any points they wish to make before we vote on that? Councillor Howitt.
Just one quick point, fully supportive of this, but when you do future reports like this, what I would just suggest is that you show where we are on the journey and how far we need to accelerate. There's always going to be financial challenges and all the rest of it, but I think having that sort of holistic view of what we need to do and how quickly we are getting on with doing it, I think is really important.
Can I just clarify, do you mean on the carbon reductions for the county council?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Goldsack, did you indicate to speak?
Yeah, just a very quick one. I think it's welcome that I think accepting this and supporting this today is showing a commitment from the administration, the council at the moment, to outdoor education, and I think they should be grateful for that endorsement.
Thank you. I'm often told I should be very grateful. No other speakers, I don't think. So, coming to a conclusion on this, yes, I'm very excited by this. I think it's yet another step on that journey towards zero carbon for council-owned buildings, and that's tremendously good news. So I'm delighted that this is on the agenda for today, and very much hope that it will receive support of this committee. So can I see those in favour of the recommendations, please? I think, looking round, that is unanimous. So thank you very much indeed, and thank you, Sarah and Cheryl, for your contributions to that today. Moving on then to item 9, which is the Oxcam ARC Spatial Framework Sustainability Appraisal and Shared Regional Principles. This is now Emma Fitch is going to present this to us. So thank you, Emma.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, so the report and the proposed draft response in front of members today on pages 99 to 132 of your agenda document pack relates to the government's Oxford to Cambridge ARC, or Oxcam ARC, which is an area that the government has identified as a key economic priority, as they see it's an area with the potential to be one of the most prosperous, innovative and sustainable economic areas in the world. So the geographical area of the Oxcam ARC has been shown on figure 1.1 on page 100 of your agenda document pack, but it's effectively made up of the 5 counties of Oxfordshire, Bedfordshire, Buckinghamshire, Cambridgeshire and Northamptonshire. So just to say that this is the first of 3 planned public consultations on the spatial framework, which is due to close on Tuesday the 12th of October 2021. And from early discussions with colleagues in the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government, so MHCLG, the consultation document has been left very strategic at this stage. And this is to ensure that councils and local communities and residents alike can help to shape the future vision for this large geographical area. So to explain the steps going forward, which I hope the report has done, using feedback from this initial consultation on the vision as a foundation, the next document proposed by MHCLG is planned to be published for consultation in spring 2022. And that will be focusing on the options for delivering the spatial framework's objectives based on that feedback from this early stage. With a third planned public consultation where the government hoped to publish a draft spatial framework in autumn 2022, with implementation of the final framework shortly thereafter. The spatial framework will form part of national planning policy, which has been explained in section 4 of the officer report, and is intended to guide the future growth of the Oxcamark area until 2050. The report, and more importantly our proposed draft response set out in Appendix A, not only looks at the spatial framework consultation document that was published on the 20th of July 2021 by MHCLG, but also looks at the associated sustainability appraisal scoping report with its associated annex. So both the report and proposed draft response seek to endorse and where appropriate build upon the published shared regional principles for protecting, restoring and enhancing the environment document, which is discussed in paragraph 2.4 of the report from a Cambridgeshire County Council perspective. Paragraphs 4.1 on page 106 of the agenda document acknowledges that officers are already engaged in conversations with MHCLG and also Homes England on key topics, and through working groups on things like design and placemaking, engagement, routes to delivery and the emerging technical evidence base, to ensure that we're able to shape and influence proposals in the ARC that addresses our aspirations, whilst also being mindful of some of the concerns that will be held by our local communities and residents of Cambridgeshire, including cross-boundary issues. It also allows officers to ensure that there is a consistency of information, particularly around related projects such as East-West Rail, where feedback has already been given. Paragraphs 4.2 and 4.3 on page 106 of your agenda document pack also provide the need to involve wider stakeholders at an early stage, and that will include examples such as the minerals and waste sector, and also to how to consider we use the best use of resources across all the tiers of the decision-making process to create a coordinated approach with both the combined authority and also our city and district council colleagues. So on that basis, I would like to ask members to endorse the proposed response set out in Appendix A, subject to any changes delegated to the Executive Director Place and Economy in consultation with the Chair and Vice Chair of the Environment and Green Investment Committee, to allow a response to be submitted before the consultation deadline of the 12th of October. However, I'm happy to take any comments or questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emma. Members, are there any questions for Emma on her report? I'm not seeing any, so the recommendation is as Emma has suggested, and I am happy to move that from the chair. Yes, we are going to have a debate as soon as you have seconded the recommendations. Thank you. Which opens this now up to debate. So, do I see any speakers? Councillor Howitt and Councillor Ferguson. Thank you.
Forgive me my enthusiasm. Thanks to Emma for this. There's lots in the draft reply that we should strongly endorse, including the points on the historic environment, social equality being an issue which is completely missing from the government, and the section on barriers to housing, the reference to development on brownfield sites and to social needs. There's a lot in this that I'd strongly endorse. I think I would suggest to the committee that we don't just say that we're not endorsing by replying, but that we say that we should oppose this unless certain steps are taken, and I'll explain that now. Essentially, and we had the very good comment earlier about the attacks on the planning system and local accountability. This is essentially about transferring planning powers to national government that has currently been in local government, and I can't see any reason why we would be in favour of that. unless something else is being got from it, and I don't see what that something else is. If you read the various questions from the government in their survey, they suggest that this is going to be good for broadband, it's going to be good for housing, good for the environment, better biodiversity, and then we answer very important anyway. But the point is, what is the value added that comes from the Oxford-Cambridge arc for those things that should be our policies anyway? And I don't see that anywhere at all. And the key is any sort of lack of governance beyond central government in order to deliver this. And that's what has to change in that, with local democratic accountability being involved and at the table, and local government, including our authority, being seen as equal partners in delivering it. If you look at the government's question 1 about engagement, it's all about surveys and focus groups. It's not actually talking to local councils and involving local councils. And I think we should be very strongly making that point. And in our draft response to question 2 on engagement, we say that there should be clarity on whether this development is additional or whether it's included in the local plans of the local authorities. Well, actually, I think that's wrong. If this is the right thing to do, then the local authorities should coordinate across the arc, but then it should be in the local planning process. It's not. We don't want clarity about that. We should oppose it unless that is the case. On carbon and climate change, I think our draft wording is too weak. We say to help the county's aspirations for net zero. I think, again, if this is really going to fly as a project, then there should be measurable, clear evidence that it's going to achieve net zero. And of course, that's not something that we want. It's something the government says it wants. So why not put this in if they are sincere about that? I'd also like us to be stronger in saying not just reference to brownfield sites, but there should be a priority for development on brownfield sites. Unless you do that, it's always cheaper for the developers to do it in greenfields. I also think that there is a lack of integration in the proposal, so we're going to build houses here and we're going to promote sustainability there as a bit of an add-on, creative biodiversity or whatever. And it should be integrated. The housing itself should be meeting the carbon targets and all of the stuff that we believe about transport, although I think that is well within the draft. Access to housing, again, in our draft answer, we say it should only be taken into account. We should be a social housing authority. We should be championing the fact that there is a lack of social housing for people who are disadvantaged and less well off, who we represent. And again, if we were to support this, we would want to see money that enables that more affordable housing for people who are currently disadvantaged in the housing market. And on waste, I like what's there, but I think, again, if it's going to be value added, then there should be circular economy principles and net zero for waste as well in the proposals. If the government was going to come forward with proposals that achieve those aspirations and would put extra money into helping us deliver them and treat local government as an equal partner, we should support that. But if they don't, we shouldn't.
Thank you. Councillor Ferguson.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to support most of what Councillor Howard said with one reservation. I'd also like to thank you for your fantastic response to which is a really difficult to understand and comprehend process. It's not there's no detail in the Oxcam Arc consultation, and you've done a really good job of highlighting lots of the problems. My reservation on what Councillor Howard said is with regard to regional planning. Oxcam Arc is basically a house building proposal. The idea is to build 1 million houses between Oxford and Cambridge. We're talking about North Stowe Phase 1 earlier. That's 1,000 homes. It's 1,000 times 1,000 homes, and that's a lot of properties. So what I think you'll find is that EWR and to a certain extent the A421 improvements are being used as a justification to unlock large areas of rural countryside for housing developments. Now, I'm really grateful that you've mentioned cross-border issues, and particularly those related to those of us who are butted up against Bedfordshire, because in St Neots, the Oxcam Arc, although the framework hasn't been agreed, is being used as a justification by our neighbouring authorities, including both Bedfordshire authorities, to build a huge number of houses on our border. So in St Neots, which is a town of about 35 to 40,000 people, Bedfordshire are proposing to build 20,000 homes on our borders, to which we have no say. So, and the reason for that is because St Neots is located on this intersection between the East Coast Main Line and EWR, the route of which hasn't been decided yet, although the property developers seem to think that it's going ahead as planned at the moment. So my concern is that Oxcam Arc is causing these problems. It should be the solution for these problems. You know, St Neots residents, Huntingdonshire residents, should have a say in massive housing developments being planned on our borders, actually on the edge of the town. And I think the Oxcam Arc could provide a method of doing that, but at the moment it's being used as a justification just for a massive house building programme, and that concerns me, and it should concern all of us who represent rural areas, because I think every day I look at Google and I find another housing development plan between Bedford and Camborne, basically, and it's not difficult to imagine that the final game of this is going to be a continuous conurbation linking Oxford to Cambridge, or maybe Bedford to Cambridge, but it's going to change the rural nature of the East of England, and it's something that I think we should all think very carefully about. But thank you very much for an excellent response.
Thank you, Councillor Ferguson. I'm not seeing... Sorry, Councillor Milnes, yes, and then after that I'm not seeing any other speakers.
Yes, I'd just like to reinforce some of my own reservations about the proposals, and particularly the inconsistencies between government statements in one respect, which are then conflicted with others. We've seen that with East West Rail and diesel. I mean, what nonsense is it to have a new railway line powered by diesel locomotives? I mean, it's an utter nonsense. But that was what was proscribed in 2017 by the Department for Transport on East West Rail. So we've got similar things on a smaller scale on the A428 project, where the government guidance is for LTN 120 in cycling. And actually, I don't know whether it's Highways England or National Highways now. Another very expensive name change. But that's government guidance, and national highways are ignoring that. Told us that at our last highways meeting in the Corn Exchange. And as somebody that lived and worked in the North East for 18 years, I'm quite familiar with the operation of development corporations. And the DevCos are likely to come with this proposal. And they'll be the thing that are driving the new housing that comes with it. And we will be detached from that process. So earlier points about local accountability are under threat. And I think we should make that point very clear. Thank you.
Councillor Goldsack.
Thank you. I'll try and keep it brief, Chair. And this is more for understanding, because I've listened with real interest to people that have obviously got more knowledge than me, which is most people. The 4.4, I understood, section 4.4, when I read it, I understood that was the planning process. Therefore, the actual spatial framework does come under MPPF, links into the local plan and any neighbourhood planning. But what I'm hearing around the table is that's not the case. Or I think that's what I'm hearing around the table. Well, okay, well, we're in an awkward position here, aren't we? We've got a big report, and I totally respect Councillor Hewitt gave a very broad understanding and input into this, which was most welcome. But I go back to this, you know, what I'm hearing around here is we've got to be involved in local planning, and I agree with that. I brought that up in a previous area. But is section 4.4 accurate then, that neighbourhood plans that our communities are creating that link into a local plan at a district level, are they going to be just run roughshod over? Is that what we're now saying, or people around the table are now saying? I'm a bit confused by it.
Thank you. I'll ask Steve Cox to clarify that.
Thank you. I think the danger is that the Oxcam Arc comes forward with a spatial vision, and as Emma has said, some preferred options for housing growth that will be in parts of the region that are not based on what is right for those locations on the evidence that is normally driven through the local plan process. So it's top down rather than bottom up, I suppose, to sort of summarise it. And I think therefore that the risk that we have is that we're going to get done too in that respect, rather than, as has been rightly said throughout, that the local plan should be driving the plan making process and should be driving the location for new development based on not on new transport infrastructure, but on what's right for those areas. And I think that's the challenge we've got at this point, is it doesn't seem to be going in that direction, and we need to make our points really clearly. And I do think if we can, I think we do say in the principles that the planning must be led through the local plan, but I think we can strengthen that further with the comments that have been made today to get that point really coming across strongly. So it is a sort of a complex planning picture, but I think the sort of the summary of it is that we risk being done to by a top-down approach to regional planning. If colleagues can remember the regional spatial strategy days, something akin to that.
Thank you. Councillor Goldsack, did you have any? You're content with that, right? Okay, thank you. So, to sum up, I think we've heard a lot of concern around the table, and I think those are concerns that I share equally, that this is a very top-down process. It's, as the first of the general principles in the report says on page 111, this is a government initiative. It's not been created by ourselves or by local authority partners. It is a government initiative. I'm quite reassured by the general principles, and particularly after that, the first section of the growth response. It is true that we don't have the detail required to be certain about what we're responding to. And I think we also need to be aware that we are not, in responding to this and engaging with it, we are not endorsing this as a concept, or indeed the detail that we do have. And this must be, as other members have said just now, this must be led through local planning processes and through local democracy. That is absolutely fundamental. So I'm very grateful indeed to officers, to Emma in particular, for putting together the response that we've got here. It is one of a number of responses. This isn't the only opportunity we will have to comment on this. There will be much more of this coming forward, and this isn't also the only forum in which we will be commenting. There are regular meetings going on between civil servants and others around all of this. So with that in mind, and with in mind also the delegation that is we are making to Steve as our executive director, in consultation with myself and Councillor Gay, to tidy up the response and tweak anything that needs tweaking in light of the comments we've received this morning. Are we happy to agree the recommendations? Can I see a show of hands on that, please, those in favour? Thank you very much. Anybody against? Any abstentions? So that again looks unanimous to me. Thank you very much, and thank you, Emma. So item 10 then is the finance monitoring report. And do we have Sarah Haywood? We have Sarah Haywood virtually, I believe, so good luck with that.
So if I may, Chair, what I'm going to do is once I say to the speaker to start speaking, if I can ask that the speaker does the whole presentation. And
hello, can committee hear me?
Hang on, let me just, I had a message, but hang on. No, sorry, don't worry. She can't hear you. Right. So this is the whole point.
Thank you.
So she's waiting for me. Just wait. Stop for a minute. Okay, so the problem is, if they try and listen into the live stream is behind them. The other problem is then you'll get the feedback as you're hearing it. So all I'm going to ask is that when I ask Sarah and also the later item for Adam, please don't stop. Please let them do the whole presentation. I've told them to mute the live stream behind them. I will then say that I will give any questions via them and they will keep them short and come back. So if we're ready, I will now ask her to start.
I think we're ready. Please don't interrupt.
Thank you, Chair. I'll keep my introduction very brief, as actually there's very little change since the previous report, and also obviously circumstances aren't easy to present like this. This is the Finance Monitoring Report for Place and Economy as at the end of July, and it forecasts an underspend of £205,000 on the revenue side. The only thing I was really going to draw to your attention is in the report is that the funding allocated to waste through business planning for COVID isn't required for COVID, and it's addressing other pressures within waste. But given it's already in the waste budget, it's sort of self-contained. I haven't got anything else, but if there's any questions, thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Sarah. I'm going to move on to questions which Emma will relay as before. Can I just draw to your attention that in some of the tables, members, there are cells which are in grey, which I believe are the ones that are our responsibility. So before people start asking all sorts of questions about highways and street lights, could they please confine themselves to questions that are within the remit of this committee? Are there any questions which members would like Emma to relay to Sarah? I'm not seeing any, so thank you very much indeed, Sarah, for your report, and thank you, Emma, for the offer. Are there any, the recommendation is that we review, note and comment. So are there any comments that members would like to make on the report? I'm not seeing any speakers, so I'm going to put that to the vote. Are we happy to review, note and comment? Can I see those in favour, please? Thank you very much. Anybody against? No. Any abstentions? No. Thank you very much indeed, members. So on then to item 11, which is the business planning proposals for 2022 to 27. And so I'm going to ask Steve Cox to introduce this report.
Thank you, Chair. This paper is one that is setting out the process for business planning and the context in which that business planning will take place over the coming months. You'll see from the paper that the backdrop in terms of overarching sort of pressures and priorities around economic recovery, zero carbon that we've heard about this morning, social value are underpinning the thought process that's going into business planning. That's in paragraph 1.7. And specifically for this committee in section 5.2, there are those areas that are being explored for investment or savings over the next few weeks, and around those bullet points, business cases will be prepared and they will be brought back to this committee at its next meeting later in the autumn. So that's if that is a focus, can be a focus for any discussion, that would be welcome. Any thoughts on what's listed in 5.2? But the process thereafter, after today, is that the business cases will be prepared based on those bullet points. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Steve. Members, do you have any questions for Steve on the content of the report? Councillor Milnes, then Councillor Goldsack.
So could you help us and just give us a broad verbal outline of how we're going to deal with that £64 million deficit over the next 4 years, please?
It will be through the business planning process. So there's a number of options that can be put forward for addressing that through council in February. But the focus for this autumn through every committee and every part of the council is to look at where there is scope for savings to be made based on the priorities that we have from the administration and where there is potential for services to be strengthened through investment, perhaps with a potential for savings to follow. that's also included in some of the ideas that have been put forward. So it is through the preparation of business cases against the bullet points in 5.2. There will be a similar set across every committee that is meeting at the moment. They'll be prepared in the next few weeks, and we'll come back to each committee for views on whether those business cases are ones that the committee wants to support, and that will then go forward to Strategy and Resources in January, to then inform the budget proposals for Council in February.
But can I confirm then that process won't start with a particular agenda for looking at a particular area of spending, that you're looking for savings over and above others?
It's very clearly down to each committee to look at what options it has in front of it. There'll be the priorities that the administration has got that need to be reflected in investments and savings, and I think some of those are set out in the paper that you've got in front of you today.
Thank you very much indeed. Councillor Goldsack.
Yeah, just a quick one on 5.2. I recognise most of the things you've got down there. Just a question around the Scale Up Schools Low Carbon Heating Programme. Is that to reach into academy-led schools, or are we still talking about just state-run schools?
It's both, but in terms of the offer to the academy schools would be how you can provide a consultancy offer compared to working with the maintained schools, where we supply and support on the low carbon heating exchange from gas boilers.
If you remember, Councillor Goldsack, we had the paper to the last meeting which was talking about the new approach to funding of maintained schools, and also flagging up the consultancy opportunity to work with academies.
That's exactly why I asked this question, but yeah, thank you. Thank you, Cheryl.
Thank you. Any other comments on this? We then have the business planning proposals to note and comment once again. So I'm not seeing any other speakers. Councillor Howitt.
Thank you for your patience to all members. On my day trip out to the Environment Committee, I promise I won't come back soon. The only thing I want to say about this is that my aspiration, I believe that of the joint administration, is that we move to totally triple bottom line accounting in our budget. And I think the authority is well on its way in relation to social capital, but is behind in terms of natural capital. But there are governments, there are councils that when they prepare their budgets, prepare a budget which is finance, society and environment as equals. And that's what we should be doing as an authority. And so I want to take this opportunity of my day out at the Environment Committee to urge the members to push for that. Because it's completely possible. I believe our officers are interested in it and want to move in that direction. And I believe ultimately, if we're going to be a genuine net zero council, then this is absolutely essential. So I want you to really push for this, and I'm sorry to take this opportunity to share that with you.
Indeed, thank you very much. Councillor Bradnam.
Sorry, being a bit of a dim, but I didn't actually, there was a crucial word in there that sounded like something like triple, and I didn't hear actually what it was you're saying we should do, Councillor Howitt. So sorry, forgive me for not hearing properly.
No worry. Triple bottom line. So each budget has finance column, society column, and environment column. And lots of people do it, and there's no reason why we shouldn't do it, and I want you to push for it.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any other speakers. So are we happy now to agree the recommendations, having noted and commented? Can I see those in favour, please? Against? Abstentions? Unanimous again, I think. Thank you very much indeed. So then item 12 out of 13 is the waste management PFI contract variations to water beach facility permits. And I think once again we go through the technology torture of seeking to have a contribution through virtual means. And I hope that we have Adam able to be with us and to say anything he wants to say on his report with Emma's capable assistance. So, Emma, if you're able to line Adam up to do that, that would be wonderful.
Right, I've now said he can go.
Thank you, Chair. These changes relate to the Waterbeach Mechanical Biological Treatment Facility, which treats the black bin residual waste, and the in-vessel composting facility, or the IVC facility, which treats food, including garden waste, both located at Waterbeach Waste Management Park. As a result of the implementation of the Industrial Emissions Directive, new odour limits have been imposed on both the facilities, where previously no limits were imposed. The Environment Agency have amended the environmental permits for both facilities to include these new limits, but the Environment Agency did not prescribe the solution. It is for AMI, as the operator of the sites, to propose a solution to the EA, who then monitor compliance against the new standards once implemented. AMI have proposed solutions that are most likely to limit odours to the required levels without incurring excessive cost. These changes are required to the facilities to ensure that they continue to comply with their environmental permits after the deadline of August 2022. There are residual risks that the changes may not deliver the reductions required in the odour emissions, and further works may be required if this solution doesn't actually reduce the odour limits to the levels required in the new revised permits. The contract, the PFI contract that we have with AMI, allows qualifying changes in law, has provisions around qualifying changes in law, which allow costs to be passed through to the council and relief granted during the delivery of works, as we are required to leave AMI in a situation where they are no better and no worse as a result of the change. This risk was accepted when the council signed the contract back in 2008. Although there may be short-term environmental impacts while the works are carried out, as waste may need to go to landfill while the facilities aren't operated and the work's implemented, the long-term benefit will be a significant reduction in the odour emissions from both plants, which will carry on through the remaining life of the contract to 2036 and beyond, as the facility will then be handed back to the authority and can continue to operate and treat waste beyond that date. If the works are not implemented, AMI will not be able to comply with the new permit conditions, and it's highly likely that waste processing will have to stop at both facilities, which risks us losing our PFI funding and also has the risk that the waste will need to be sent to landfill rather than going through the processing facilities. The recommendation contains that have been put to committee also contain a recommendation on the funding. If AMI are able to secure the funding to do this, the cost for serving that debt will also be passed through to the county council, and those borrowing costs are likely to be higher than the public works loan borrowing that the county council can do themselves. The PFI contract requires AMI to obtain best value in delivering the works and minimising the impacts of the shutdown that is required while they're implemented. And there are PFI clauses to cover stage payments for the works. We also have open book clauses that allow transparency over all costs incurred. And it's also worth pointing out that DEFRA approval may be required for the works in order to maintain our PFI funding. The delegations, as I said, the first one is seeking a recommendation to go to the Strategy and Resources Committee to put the funding in place. And then the other recommendations are seeking a delegation to Steve Cox in consultation with chairs and vice chairs to do all the necessary recommendations and implement the changes. And the recommendations also contain recommendations to put in place the staffing resources and support needed from other departments and external advisors. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed, Adam. Before we go on, I need to remind members that this item has 2 confidential appendices, and if you want to ask questions or make comments that relate to the confidential appendices, we will have to move into exempt session. With that in mind, I'd now like to ask members whether you have any questions that you wish Emma to relay to Adam about the report. Councillor Milnes.
Yeah, just a quick question to pick up on Adam Smith's comment about borrowing. It clearly would be a preference, I would have thought, to go for Public Works loan board borrowing rather than on the commercial market, and I just want to check that that's our preference and that would be the route A if it's, yeah.
Right. We'll wait for... Yeah, we'll wait for Adam's response relayed back via Emma on that, but clearly the most economical way we can to do it.
I was just about to say, while he's typing, because I'm not sure how speedy is typing, I'm involved in some of those meetings as well with Amy, and one of the things that Adam and I are looking at is the best option for the council. So as well as pushing back on how much things are going to cost, one of the things that we've said is actually if it is something that is going to be better for us to try and get, then that will be something we've done. But he has said, yes, the Public Works loan body is likely to be the best value, and that's what we'd like to take forward, if that's the case.
Yeah, so there's nothing about the PFI contract that's going to bind us to go for that. I mean, that's what got us into this in the first place, wasn't it?
Just double checking that, but obviously from my experience in the past, there is nothing that would stop us, but he'll just come back and confirm.
Thank you. Wait for response from Adam. It's a bit like a séance, this, isn't it? No, let's... No.
He said is the PFI allows either to provide the funding, so it does do both. His problem is he can't hear the bit in between, and I'm having to, as far as possible, praise-see it. So it's difficult to get the context across for him.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions for Adam? No? Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Adam, for your report and answering the question. So I'm going in a moment to open this for debate and move the recommendations, but before I do so, I'm very conscious that Councillor Anna Bradnam is the local member for this item. Is there anything, Councillor Bradnam, that you would like to say to us as the local member?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for anticipating it. I was also feeling, yet again, I need to declare an interest because this is in my division. Yes, clearly there is a need to do this, and so I'm very happy to support this, although we understand the costs are likely to be considerable. From a local viewpoint, I know residents in Waterbeach will actually be extremely pleased that any improvements are being undertaken to reduce emissions and odour from the plant. This is a constant, not constant, but a very present concern for them in Waterbeach, and the specific nature of the odour is particularly unpleasant. So I shall be very pleased to see any improvement of this type, which will improve the quality of life, not only for the current residents of Waterbeach, but also for the future residents of the Waterbeach new town as well. So this is really important to do. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Councillor Bradnam. The recommendations are to support the proposals in the report, recommend to Strategy and Resources the spending necessary to carry this out, and delegate responsibility to the Executive Director in consultation with the Chair and Vice Chair to commission advisors, commit internal resources, evaluate options, select the technical solutions, submit a variation business case, agree the amendments, and provide regular updates. So those are the recommendations. I'm happy to move those from the chair and seek a seconder. Thank you very much, and therefore open that to debate now. Can I see any speakers wishing to contribute to the debate on this? Councillor Gardner.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yes, I would just like to add to the recommendations that we have regular updates to this committee. I know it says to the Chair and the Vice Chair, but I think it would be beneficial not only for the local member, but for all members of this committee to have a regular update. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. I don't see that there should be any objection to that, and I'm not seeing any howls of anguish at that suggestion. So thank you very much. Yes, I'm happy for that to be added. Are there any other comments on this before we move to the vote? Councillor Bradnam.
A late question. I'm sorry. At what point is this likely to actually, I can't remember what time it's actually likely to take effect, the benefits of it?
So if I come back in on that, so effectively the deadline that has been put in place by the Environment Agency on the environmental permits is August 2022. Amy have already started to come to look at what potentially they can do without needing planning permission. One of the things that I've started to highlight is, depending on what is going to come forward and what they're proposing, there's also elements that they may need planning permission for as well, which is why you've all obviously noted the interest from a planning committee point of view. But as Adam says, because the Environment Agency and their permit don't actually specify what works need to be done, that's what's being considered at the moment, and that's what we're really kind of making sure we get the right option, because what we don't want to do is spend all this money, and particularly noting the different consultations that are out at the moment with government and the particular way that waste potentially may get collected in the future, the implications that may have, because what we don't want to do is spend money on a facility that then isn't going to work in the future. It's also worth saying that we do actually have a liaison meeting which you would have seen coming up as well for Amy, and Amy should be presenting some of this information at that on the 6th of October.
Thank you very much, Emma, and perhaps paragraphs 2.2 and 2.3 would be useful. There's the schedule for the MBT works is currently that those would start at the beginning of February next year and take approximately 6 months, and the upgrade works to the IVC would start in September 2021, this month indeed, and continue again for 6 months, so completion in February 2022, subject to the the variables that Emma has mentioned. I'm not seeing any other.
It's really a question, not a comment. So I'm going back a stage. I note that the MBT preferred option 2, doesn't guarantee that it meets the required odour standards. Can you quantify how uncertain that is? Is it what's the degree of risk involved in that?
So what I'm going to do is just quickly start typing to Adam so he can back me up on what I'm saying. But he's also said that the IVC date has slipped owing to the requirement for planning. I knew it ended up being my fault, but yeah, so there's been a slight slippage already. I think the safest thing to say is that the benefits we'd be looking at is from that August 2022 date. But we're just mindful of timescales on the best windows. So, for example, the IVC, when you haven't got the grass cutting, for example, is the best time of the year. Coming back, let me just quickly type the question as well. Hang on, I'm good at my multitask. He's so good, he's been listening online and it's called back up as well, so I don't need to actually type it all out to him. So we've engaged some technical consultants to review the options and the solutions proposed by Amy and to quantify the residual risk. As part of that, when we have the liaison meeting as well, we actually have colleagues from the Environment Agency. So with what they're setting, what we're going to be doing is to make sure that what is starting to come out of that we'll also be sharing with them. And actually where they've started to come in and have a look, for example, on the in-vessel composting, so the IVC solution, which in the main, a number of those can start to proceed without the need for planning permission. In fact, if it hasn't already gone out, I authorised it yesterday, so there should be a non-material amendment on that going out anyway. There will be elements that can start going through, but we will be checking whether they are going to be meeting the requirements as soon as possible. So I'd like to say that before we proceed with the money, we will reduce that risk as far as possible and we'll have had the relevant technical expertise into it. But there will always be an element of risk, unfortunately, in the way that it's written. But that's why we'll engage the Environment Agency in particular, as well as our own technical expertise. And on top of that, when we're getting the funding, whether it's ourselves or Amy, the lenders will also be looking for some security as to what is being proposed is actually something that's going to be delivered. So from my perspective, I don't want us paying money out if it's going to be wasted. So please be assured, as low as I can get that risk, we will get it.
Thank you very much indeed. With that then, I'm going to put the recommendations to the vote with the inclusion of the regular updates to committee that was requested. So can I see all those in favour, please? That looks unanimous to me, so thank you very much indeed for that, members. And we will then move on to item 13, our final item, which is the committee agenda plan. Dawn, do you have anything to advise us of?
Just quickly looking at the items for the reserve day, I noticed I haven't put business planning, and business planning will definitely be on that day. All the reserve committee meetings are being used this round for business planning.
Thank you very much, Dawn. Any questions or observations from members on this? No, in that case, sorry, was that Councillor Hathorn? Was
It might be a question, maybe it's for, will this item be open for debate? Well, should I speak?
Go for it.
In light of the amount of time that we spent discussing flooding, and I appreciate that the local flood risk management strategy is coming to the next committee, but it does feel as though a standalone workshop or meeting about flooding, it feels there's a need for that. It feels there's a lot of information to talk about and ideas and things to work through about flooding.
Thank you. Yes, and I'm sure that would be of interest not just to members of this committee, but to all members, because so many of us have had this experience over the months. So if we can take that away and consider how we can put that into effect, that I think would be a very helpful suggestion.
And at some point, perhaps extending it out as well, because we need to be talking to the district and city council, so it just gets bigger and bigger. But yes,
as we are doing through the flood and water partnership, so we're having those constant conversations. But yes, I think a opportunity for further discussion would be very helpful. Thank you very much for that suggestion. I think we are in agreement then on this. Are we content? Do I need to put that to the vote? I don't think so, no. Okay, well, thank you very much. I think we've now reached the end of our agenda. So thank you to members, thank you to officers, both present and remote. Thank you to those who have made the IT work as best as it can. And have a pleasant and safe remainder of the day. Thank you.